Hey guys, tonight we drift into the shadowy corridors of medieval palaces where incense mingles with the faint scent of herbs and the air trembles with whispers of monarchs who like to see the world through slightly wobbly eyes. You trudge past torch-lit tapestries, the walls thick with history and a hint of smoke, and it's almost as if the portraits themselves are watching, smirking at your modern sensibilities. And let's be real, you probably won't survive this without a few raised eyebrows at the sheer audacity of some of these royals. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's fun to picture someone in, say, Iceland at 3 a.m., wide-eyed and listening to medieval highs. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start in the palace kitchens, a place thick with the aroma of roasting meats, crushed herbs, and sometimes more curious ingredients. Imagine a courtier discreetly grinding hemp seeds into a paste for medicinal purposes while nobles gossip about the latest alchemist's concoctions. These plants weren't just for flavor, they were status symbols. Tiny indulgences hidden behind velvet curtains. You can almost hear the faint clink of goblets filled with wine steeped in calming or mind-altering herbs, and the servants exchange knowing glances. Some historians still argue whether these botanical adventures were purely medicinal or recreational, but for our purposes tonight, picture them as a gentle invitation to explore a world where royals weren't afraid to experiment. As you wander past the throne room, candlelight dances across gilded carvings, and the faint scent of burning herbs curls in the air like smoke signals from centuries past. Monarchs didn't always indulge publicly. Discretion was key. One fringe anecdote mentions a king who supposedly used hemp smoke to soothe headaches during long council meetings, and though scholars debate the veracity, it paints a vivid image of private luxury. You can almost feel the weight of those golden robes, the coolness of marble floors, and the subtle thrill of secret indulgence, as if the entire palace is holding its breath in anticipation. Step further into the corridors, and you find yourself imagining a late-night herb garden hidden behind the main palace walls. Royal gardeners nurtured lavender, sage, and other aromatic plants, but some tales hint at more adventurous species. You might picture a princess lightly crushing leaves between her fingers, inhaling the calming aroma, maybe even laughing quietly at a witty courtier's joke that seems funnier than it should. Historians still argue whether these moments were personal leisure or political strategy, a blur between pleasure and power. And isn't that the charm of this era? The subtle rebellion of a well-timed puff or sip, just beneath the veneer of diplomacy and ceremonial gravitas. By the time you reach the private chambers, the muffled sounds of the castle fade, replaced by your own steady breathing and the soft rustle of tapestries in the night breeze. A fringe tale floats past. A young prince allegedly experimented with exotic herbs sent by faraway merchants, his curiosity bordering on obsession. Scholars debate the details, but the image is vivid. You see him reclining on velvet cushions, candlelight catching the glint of a small glass vial. The world outside momentarily paused. The air smells faintly of crushed leaves and beeswax, a sensory cocktail that blends history with imagination. You notice the quiet rituals of the court, discreetly spiced wines, herb-infused ointments, and the occasional whispered joke about the king's new favorite scent. These small indulgences, whether medicinal, recreational, or theatrical, paint a picture of royals who were human in the most curious, modern-sounding ways. You can almost imagine a late-night council meeting interrupted by a courtier struggling to hide a grin after a particularly fragrant experiment. Historians still argue whether these anecdotes reflect daily life or clever storytelling, but tonight, you let yourself drift in the possibilities. And as you move down a narrow hallway lined with portraits, each face seems to nod at you knowingly, their eyes sparkling with secrets of late-night herbal escapades. You feel the chill of stone underfoot, the warmth of flickering torches against your skin, and the subtle aroma of herbs that linger long after their use. Fringe stories mention kings who allegedly smoked or brewed these plants to ease tension, improve sleep, or simply pass the time. And whether fact or rumor, they add texture to the medieval tapestry you're walking through. Somewhere above, the towers creak with the wind, echoing the laughter and quiet musings of long-dead nobles. You sense the palace as a living organism, each corridor and chamber imbued with centuries of experimentation, relaxation, and daring indulgence. You might imagine a queen secretly inhaling calming vapors before attending a state dinner, or a prince discreetly sampling a new herbal potion while scribes busily chronicled battles elsewhere. Historians still debate whether these practices were widespread or limited to eccentric individuals, but in this moment, you let the smoky air of possibility settle around you. As you approach the end of the night's walk, the palace grows quieter, the faint aroma of exotic herbs a gentle companion. You picture the private chambers where monarchs whispered, laughed, and experimented with small pleasures, each indulgence a subtle rebellion against the rigidity of courtly life. Fringe accounts describe hidden alcoves for this very purpose, tiny sanctuaries where discretion and curiosity coexisted. Scholars still argue whether these were actual practices or imaginative storytelling, but the imagery is enough to lull you into the slow, rhythmic pulse of medieval life. By the time your steps take you to the highest balcony, you breathe in the cold night air, scented faintly with distant gardens and smoldering torches. The stars above seem sharper, the sounds of the castle hushed, and the world feels both distant and immediate. You've wandered through smoke, scents, and whispered stories, catching glimpses of monarchs who sought calm, pleasure, or inspiration in the gentle embrace of herbs and potions. And as the palace settles into night, so do you, floating along the corridors of imagination and history, ready to continue meeting those high-minded royals in the sections ahead. You step forward into the labyrinth of Frederick II's court, a place where the scent of roasted meats mingles with strange perfumes and the faintest hints of aromatic smoke. Frederick, often called Stupor Mundi for his astonishing intellect, is busy somewhere behind gilded doors, surrounded by scholars, alchemists, and perhaps a few nervous courtiers who are just hoping they don't get drafted into some bizarre experiment. You can almost hear the faint bubbling of ale mixed with crushed herbs, a sensory cocktail designed to soothe, stimulate, or, depending on the recipe, send your brain on a curious detour. Historians still argue whether Frederick's fascination with exotic plants was purely scientific or whether he enjoyed the occasional recreational indulgence, and for the sake of tonight, you let yourself picture a little of both. Frederick had a curiosity that was practically magnetic. He wrote treatises on falconry, astrology, and mathematics, but he also had a secret weakness for spices and herbs that could influence mood. Imagine a prince carefully stirring a fragrant mixture in a small ceramic bowl, the steam rising into candlelit eyes, his mind buzzing with philosophical questions and poetic thoughts. Fringe accounts claim he sometimes combined opium with wine to explore altered states, though scholars caution these stories might be exaggerations. Still, the image is vivid. You can almost see Frederick reclining on a velvet divan, long fingers tracing the rim of a goblet, while court musicians play softly in the background. You wander through his private chambers, walls lined with books and maps, the air perfumed by crushed herbs and the faint tang of burnt resin. A servant quietly refills a small incense burner with a mix of lavender and other calming botanicals. Frederick reportedly loved experimenting with these aromas during late-night philosophical debates. Historians still argue whether he used these substances for genuine relaxation or as a cognitive enhancer, a tool for sharpening his already legendary mind. You can almost feel the tension of the court dissolving as the fragrant smoke curls in the air, and it's easy to imagine a whispered joke about the king's new favorite pastime floating through the room. In the gardens, you notice neat rows of lavender, sage, and more exotic plants shipped from distant lands. Frederick's fascination with botany wasn't purely academic. He was intrigued by the sensory effects of these plants. Fringe stories claim he hosted discreet gatherings where trusted advisors sampled mild herbal infusions, exploring moods and perceptions as one might experiment with new instruments in an orchestra. The scent of crushed leaves and petals drifts through the air, mingling with the sounds of birds and the distant splash of a fountain. You pause, imagining a courtier delicately stirring a cup of slightly intoxicating tea, careful not to spill, careful not to be caught enjoying the king's peculiar pleasures. You wander into the hall where scholars debate, their voices rising and falling like a gentle tide. Frederick occasionally steps in, inhaling the faint aroma of incense and herbal blends, nodding sagely while simultaneously pondering whether a particular plant could improve memory, calm anxiety, or spark creativity. Historians still argue whether these experiments had tangible effects or were more ceremonial. But the very act of indulging in sensory exploration paints a vivid picture of a monarch unafraid of curiosity. You can almost hear the quiet laughter of an assistant who notices the king's eyes gleam just a little more than usual after inhaling a potent herbal concoction. The night deepens, and you wander past tapestries depicting battles and hunts, the walls faintly scented with herbs and smoke that linger from earlier gatherings. Frederick's indulgence was never purely hedonistic. It mingled with politics, philosophy, and science. Fringe anecdotes suggest that on particularly long nights, he would host private sessions where close companions tried various aromatic blends, sometimes documenting the effects meticulously, sometimes just enjoying the subtle pleasures. Scholars still debate whether these sessions were primarily intellectual experiments or if they veered into recreational indulgence, and you allow yourself to imagine the soft murmur of conversation, punctuated by occasional laughter and the clinking of cups. As you approach the end of the hall, you notice the king's study, a dimly lit room cluttered with scrolls, globes, and jars filled with dried herbs. A faint haze hangs in the air, and you can almost smell the delicate balance of lavender, sage, and perhaps something stronger. Frederick was known to experiment with combinations designed to induce calm, creativity, or focus. Historians still argue whether these were common practices in his court or exclusive eccentricities, but the very thought of it creates a bridge across centuries. You can almost feel yourself reclining on a velvet cushion, a cup of infused tea in hand, sharing a private moment with one of history's most curious minds. Finally, as you step back into the open courtyard, the cool night air mingles with residual herbal scents. You picture Frederick strolling along the colonnade, moonlight glinting off his robes, perhaps pondering astronomy or poetry while inhaling the faint perfume of his favorite plants. Fringe tales hint at small, secret gatherings where trusted courtiers explored mild intoxicants, and while scholars debate their authenticity, the imagery lingers. The courtyard feels alive with possibility, a place where intellect and indulgence coexisted quietly, elegantly, and sometimes mischievously. You take a slow breath, sensing the lingering fragrance of lavender and crushed leaves, feeling the pulse of curiosity and experimentation that defined Frederick's reign, and realize that, for all the pomp and protocol, he found small, sensory joys in a world otherwise governed by rigid expectation. You follow the echoing corridors of a castle belonging to Richard I, the Lionheart, a man whose name screams valor but whose private tastes hint at something far more nuanced. Imagine torches flickering against cold stone walls, the scent of roasted meats and crushed herbs mingling with the faint tang of the sea from some distant port. Richard, after battles and councils, reportedly turned to a variety of herbal remedies to ease the aches of war, some practical, some indulgent, and some that blurred the line between medicine and recreation. Historians still argue whether Richard's use of these plants was purely for relief or if he genuinely enjoyed the altered sensations they provided. And tonight, you allow yourself to imagine both. Picture the king in his private chambers, long hair falling into his eyes, a cup of warm tea steeped with hemp leaves in hand. The beverage was likely intended to soothe wounds or fatigue, but fringe accounts suggest that the aroma and subtle effects may have also offered a gentle, euphoric lift. You can almost hear the quiet murmur of attendants trying not to disturb their lord as he inhales the herbal steam and contemplates his next campaign. Some scholars believe Richard's indulgences were exaggerated by chroniclers seeking to humanize the otherwise fearsome warrior king. Yet, the imagery is irresistible. A battle-hardened monarch finding small, private joy in the tactile, sensory world of herbs. In the palace gardens, you imagine neatly arranged beds of sage, lavender, and even imported exotic plants brought back from crusades. Richard reportedly favored these gardens not only for beauty, but for the subtle effects of their aromas. Fringe stories claim that, during particularly long nights, he and a few trusted knights would sample mild herbal infusions, discussing strategy, poetry, or the latest news from abroad. The fragrance of crushed leaves and petals hangs in the cool night air, and you can almost feel the faint vibration of distant drums. The reminder that life outside the garden is war, politics, and negotiation, while here, at least for a moment, pleasure and reflection reign. You pass by a small chamber where alchemists and healers work, jars clinking softly in the dim candlelight. Richard reportedly experimented with various mixtures of herbs and oils, perhaps seeking relief from gout, fever, or the lingering stress of battle. Some fringe anecdotes suggest he occasionally took these substances for enjoyment, a quiet indulgence that only a select few attendants witnessed. Historians still debate whether these experiments were widespread across his court or rare, personalized routines, but for now, you allow the warm scent of crushed herbs and resin to anchor your imagination. The king's indulgence seems almost revolutionary for the time, a reminder that even warriors seek sensory respite. Step deeper into the hall where portraits of ancestors stare down, their eyes frozen in grim determination. You can almost hear Richard's laughter as he sips a cup of hemp-infused tea, the slight tingle of the brew relaxing the tension in his shoulders. Some historians argue that these recreational indulgences were minor and rare, while others point to multiple chronicled accounts hinting at a consistent, private habit. Fringe tales add color. One describes him comparing effects with a favorite knight, debating which blend produced the most serene or focused state. Imagine the faint curls of steam rising into candlelight, the rich smell of crushed herbs, and the quiet camaraderie of shared secrets in a world dominated by duty and bloodshed. As night falls, you wander to a quiet turret overlooking the castle moat. Richard reportedly enjoyed the view with a cup of spiced tea or a carefully prepared poultice, the aromas mingling with the fresh night air. Fringe reports claim he sometimes added crushed leaves of lesser-known plants for an extra lift, although scholars still argue whether these anecdotes were fact or fiction. Regardless, the image of a battle-worn monarch reclining against cold stone, steam curling up to meet the moonlight, is compelling. The tactile sensation of warm cups, the aromatic tendrils of smoke or tea, and the gentle hum of night insects create a sensory bridge to centuries past, allowing you to inhabit his quiet, indulgent moments. Later, as you pass the banquet hall now empty, faint echoes of past feasts linger. The aroma of spiced wine, the subtle waft of herbs used in sauces and ointments, and the quiet hum of post-dinner conversation. Richard's private indulgences, while discreet, were likely intertwined with these sensory experiences. Fringe anecdotes suggest that he may have experimented with these ingredients not only to soothe himself, but also to test their effects on mood and perception. Historians still debate the accuracy of these stories, but the mental image is clear. A king who, despite his legendary reputation, found solace and subtle exhilaration in the delicate, fragrant world of herbs and teas. By the time you reach the quietest part of the castle, the moonlight washes over stone floors and arched ceilings, the faint scent of herbs lingering like a memory. You imagine Richard reclining on a low bench, sipping a warm, mildly intoxicating concoction, perhaps letting a rare laugh escape after a long day of serious deliberation. He is both warrior and philosopher, ruler and sensory experimenter, and the delicate balance between duty and indulgence makes you pause. Historians still argue about the scope and intent of his herbal habits, but as the night settles, you let yourself linger in the sensory richness, imagining that even the lionheart, so famed for his bravery, appreciated quiet, fragrant escape. You follow the quiet, torch-lit corridors into the realm of Edward II, a king whose reputation wobbles between tragedy and indulgence. Imagine yourself stepping past tapestries heavy with scenes of hunts and battles, the flickering candlelight revealing glimpses of velvet cushions and gilded cups. Edward's preference for medicated wines is one of the earliest well-documented examples of a medieval monarch blending pleasure and medicine. The scents of spiced wine, honey, and crushed herbs drift from shadowed corners, inviting you to imagine a private evening where the king sips slowly, letting the warmth seep into his bones. Historians still argue whether these concoctions were designed solely for medicinal purposes or if they were a personal, recreational indulgence, and tonight, you let yourself imagine both. In a small, secluded chamber, you can picture Edward reclining against a high-backed chair, a goblet filled with deep red liquid infused with herbs and honey at his fingertips. Fringe stories suggest that some of his mixtures were stronger than the average tonic, occasionally producing a light, euphoric haze. You can almost hear a courtier tiptoeing in, whispering updates about the day, careful not to disturb the king's delicate balance of calm and stimulation. Scholars debate the extent of Edward's indulgence. Was it a coping mechanism for political stress, or did he genuinely delight in the sensory pleasures of a well-crafted drink? Either way, the image lingers. A monarch quietly experimenting with relaxation centuries before tea and cocktails became mainstream. Walking past the royal kitchens, you notice the faint aroma of crushed herbs blending with baked bread and roasted meats. Edward's wine infusions were often prepared in secrecy, combining ingredients like sage, lavender, and even a touch of hemp for subtle relaxation. Fringe anecdotes claim that on particularly stressful days, he would invite a select few favorites to sample the mixture, sparking soft laughter and hushed conversations in the otherwise rigid palace. Historians still argue whether these gatherings were routine or rare indulgences, but imagining them gives the night a delicate warmth, a gentle glow in the otherwise austere halls. You step out into a small balcony garden where moonlight glints off the leaves of carefully tended plants. Lavender, rosemary, and other aromatic herbs sway in the breeze, filling the air with subtle, calming scents. Edward reportedly appreciated the sensory effects of these plants, using them in his wine and even in small poultices. Fringe sources hint that he sometimes combined unusual herbs, creating beverages that were part medicine, part personal experiment, and part clandestine amusement. You can almost see him leaning over the stone railing, inhaling deeply, letting the night air mingle with the soft fragrance of his concoctions. Inside the chamber where courtly business usually takes place, the walls echo faintly with the memory of whispered discussions and the clink of glass. Edward's medicinal wines sometimes functioned as mild relaxants for himself and trusted advisors, helping ease tension after long days of political maneuvering. Scholars still debate whether this was purely practical or an early form of recreational indulgence, but fringe accounts make it tempting to imagine playful competitions to see who could endure the king's latest herbal wine without wincing. You can almost feel the warmth of candlelight on your skin and the subtle vibration of laughter spilling over into otherwise serious halls. The night deepens, and you wander through corridors where the scent of herbs lingers like a ghost. Edward reportedly had small alcoves where he could enjoy his infusions in private, away from the scrutiny of courtiers and political rivals. Fringe tales claim that the mixture sometimes produced unexpected effects, perhaps a moment of giggling or a sudden poetic impulse. Historians still argue whether these reports are reliable, but the atmosphere is vivid, a king alone in a candlelit chamber, testing the boundaries of flavor, aroma, and sensation, exploring the intersection of relaxation and pleasure. You imagine the delicate balance Edward maintained, a man under constant pressure, yet one who carved out private moments of indulgence, letting the warmth of wine and herbs relax the mind and body. Courtiers whisper in hushed tones, servants scurry discreetly, and the subtle hum of palace life continues in the background. Fringe stories hint at secret recipes passed down or lost, experimental blends that made even the king pause and inhale deeply before returning to the burdens of rule. Historians still debate whether Edward's habits were peculiar eccentricities or common among the nobility, but tonight, you allow the image of quiet enjoyment to fill the air. Finally, as you drift past the windows into the courtyard, the moonlight bathes the stone in silver, and you can almost hear the faint rustle of leaves in the herb gardens. Edward's wine-infused evenings seem to embody a tension between duty and desire, medicine and pleasure. Fringe accounts whisper of nights spent laughing softly with a favorite companion, goblet in hand, the air scented with herbs and honey. Historians still argue about the frequency and purpose of these indulgences, but the sensory impression is clear. A monarch, frail perhaps in reputation but vividly alive in these intimate moments, exploring flavors, scents, and gentle, mind-altering escapes. And you, wandering through his quiet castle halls, feel the warmth, smell the herbs, and sense the subtle thrill of these royal experiments, long after the candlelight has faded. You tiptoe past the quiet bustle of Isabella of France's private gardens, a secluded world tucked behind high walls where the scent of lavender, rosemary, and more exotic herbs lingers in the night air. Imagine her walking barefoot along carefully raked paths, fingers brushing over crushed leaves, inhaling their subtle fragrances. Isabella's gardens were her sanctuary, a place where medicinal and mildly intoxicating plants grew side by side, their aromas mingling to form a calming, slightly heady perfume. Historians still debate whether she consumed these herbs herself or whether they served primarily as tools for political influence. But tonight, you let yourself picture both possibilities, letting the smell of crushed leaves and petals fill the corridors of your imagination. Inside the palace, the faint clatter of goblets and murmured conversations hints at the life beyond the gardens. Isabella reportedly enjoyed private evenings steeped in herbal teas, occasionally experimenting with blends designed to soothe anxiety or inspire quiet reflection. Fringe anecdotes whisper of tiny gatherings where she and a select few confidants sampled unusual infusions, watching the effect of each sip. Some historians argue these tales exaggerate her indulgences to make her seem more human, but you can almost see her reclining on a velvet settee, candlelight flickering across delicate features, inhaling the warm aroma and enjoying the subtle shift in mood. The gardens themselves are a tapestry of sensory delight. Lavender, thyme, sage, and perhaps a few imported curiosities sway gently in the night breeze. Isabella reportedly arranged these herbs with care, their aromatic qualities blending with visual aesthetics to produce an environment both soothing and subtly intoxicating. Fringe sources claim that she would crush certain leaves between her fingers, releasing a faint, almost hallucinogenic aroma, though historians still argue whether this was ever more than rumor. You can almost hear the soft rustle of leaves as she walks along the paths, a quiet smile playing across her lips as she inhales deeply, the moonlight casting silver shadows over her carefully tended sanctuary. Inside her chambers, the air is thick with the scent of herbs steeped in water or wine, a delicate haze that seems to soften the edges of reality. Isabella reportedly experimented with combinations that were as much about mood as they were about medicinal value. Fringe anecdotes suggest that some infusions could produce moments of mild euphoria or relaxation, and you can picture her passing a cup to a trusted companion, sharing in the gentle experience. Scholars still debate whether these practices were personal indulgences or strategic, subtle tools to influence allies or manipulate courtly perception, but tonight, it doesn't matter. You inhale the imaginary aroma and allow the calm to settle over you. Walking through the palace corridors, the faint scent of crushed leaves and fragrant oils follows you. Isabella was known for her meticulous attention to detail, not only in politics, but in the sensory environment of her court. Fringe stories describe hidden alcoves where she would retreat to sample her herbal blends, whispering softly to confidantes or noting the effects of a new combination. Historians still argue about the extent and intent of these habits, but imagining them paints a vivid sensory tableau. Candles flickering, herbs releasing subtle, relaxing aromas, and a queen quietly savoring moments of personal indulgence in the midst of political chaos. You find yourself in a small courtyard, moonlight glinting off stone fountains and tiled pathways, the scent of herbs mixing with the cool night air. Isabella's love for aromatic plants was both aesthetic and functional. She reportedly experimented with teas, poultices, and ointments designed to calm nerves or spark creativity. Fringe anecdotes suggest she sometimes hosted private herbal soirees, inviting only the most trusted of advisors to share in the subtle effects of her concoctions. Scholars still argue whether these were genuine recreational practices or symbolic gestures of refinement, but the visual of softly laughing nobles inhaling fragrant steam as they exchange secrets is irresistible. The night grows deeper, and you wander toward the walls where moonlight pools on the stone floors, imagining Isabella leaning against a trellis, inhaling deeply, savoring the aromatic whispers of lavender, thyme, and perhaps something stronger imported from distant lands. You can almost hear the faint laughter of a confidant, the soft clink of a cup set aside, and the quiet exhale of relief from the day's burdens. Fringe reports hint at herbal mixtures so subtle and nuanced they could barely be detected, yet their effect was said to relax the mind and sharpen social acuity. Historians still debate the reliability of these anecdotes, but the imagery endures. A queen who mastered politics and pleasure with equal care, quietly bending the world to her will while indulging in small, fragrant escapes. Finally, as you drift through the gardens one last time, the moonlight catches dew on leaves, and the gentle aroma of crushed herbs lingers like a memory. You picture Isabella's serene expression, the subtle thrill of experimentation, and the quiet satisfaction of indulging senses, often neglected in the rigid rituals of court life. Scholars may still argue whether she personally partook or orchestrated indulgence as theater, but in the dim glow of your imagination, it feels entirely plausible. A monarch both shrewd and sensorially attuned, weaving herbs, scents, and quiet enjoyment into the fabric of royal life. The night hums with the residual energy of her gardens, a delicate, intoxicating serenity that seems to seep into your own thoughts, coaxing you to linger a little longer in this scented, candlelit world. You wander through the elaborate corridors of Charles V's palace, feeling the chill of stone floors under your feet and the lingering warmth of candlelight bouncing off gilded walls. Charles, known to his contemporaries as the Wise, had a reputation for intellect and careful governance, yet there's a softer, more playful side hinted at in the scent of herbs wafting from hidden chambers. He reportedly dabbled in cannabis teas, a curious indulgence said to ease migraines and inspire contemplative thought. Historians still argue whether these beverages were common staples for his relaxation or rare experiments indulged in private, but you allow the idea to take hold. A king, thoughtful and deliberate, exploring the sensory pleasures of aromatic leaves and warm liquids. Imagine Charles seated in a dimly lit study, manuscripts and astrological charts scattered across a large oak table. A small silver teapot steams faintly, releasing the earthy, slightly bitter scent of cannabis infused with calming herbs. Fringe tales hint that he sometimes added exotic flowers or rare imported ingredients to enhance flavor or effect, producing a subtle, almost ethereal high. Courtiers nearby might whisper about the king's strange habits, though discretion was paramount. You can almost feel the tension between secrecy and indulgence in the air, like walking on polished marble that has retained the faint scent of history and herbs alike. In the royal gardens, neatly trimmed hedges and rows of aromatic plants create both beauty and subtle stimulation. Charles reportedly arranged lavender, rosemary, and other botanicals to blend visually and olfactorily, producing a soothing atmosphere for private reflection. Fringe anecdotes claim he occasionally invited a trusted companion to share in a cup of cannabis tea, observing reactions with the curiosity of a natural philosopher. Historians still debate the authenticity of these social rituals, questioning whether they were ordinary leisure or merely exaggerated chronicles meant to illustrate the king's wisdom in experimentation. Either way, the imagery is tantalizing. Candlelight flickering over attentive faces, faint curls of herbal steam rising, and the muted laughter of companions savoring the quiet pleasure of shared indulgence. Inside the palace chambers, jars of dried herbs and spices line the shelves, mingling in scent and effect. Charles reportedly experimented with dosage, sometimes combining teas with honey or mild fermentations to create a balanced effect. Fringe reports suggest that the results ranged from calm introspection to light euphoria, and that he occasionally recorded these effects meticulously, noting which combinations inspired poetry, contemplation, or simple relaxation. Scholars still argue about whether these experiments were systematic studies or casual indulgences, but imagining them offers a sensory window into the private world of a medieval monarch, meticulous, curious, and quietly playful. The hallways echo faintly with the soft steps of attendants who move carefully to avoid disturbing the king's contemplative state. Charles reportedly preferred solitude when sampling his herbal concoctions, though he sometimes shared his teas with close advisors during late-night discussions. Fringe stories hint at small, experimental tastings where the subtle effects of the infusions sparked intellectual conversation or even gentle laughter. Historians still debate whether these anecdotes were factual or embellished, but you can feel the imagined atmosphere, the aroma of crushed leaves, the faint sweetness of honey, and the sense of experimentation mingling with leisure. You move toward a balcony overlooking the gardens, the night air cool and carrying the scent of crushed herbs. Charles is said to have inhaled deeply here, letting the delicate fragrances mingle with the night breeze. Fringe reports suggest that certain combinations of teas and scents were designed to inspire clarity of thought or creative reflection, though historians remain divided about the accuracy. You can almost picture the king reclining against the stone railing, a small cup in hand, observing the moonlight glinting off garden fountains while absorbing both the aroma and the calming effects of his carefully chosen plants. Later, in a smaller private room lined with scrolls and illuminated manuscripts, Charles reportedly enjoyed a quiet cup of herbal tea before retiring. Fringe anecdotes suggest that some blends were mildly intoxicating, designed to relax both body and mind, while others were purely sensory, enhancing smell and taste without producing overt effects. Scholars still debate whether Charles's indulgences were common practice or reserved for moments of intense stress, but the mental image remains: a thoughtful king surrounded by texts and subtle fragrances, pausing to inhale, sip, and let the world settle around him. Finally, as you drift toward the quieter sections of the palace, the faint scent of herbal infusions lingers in the air, mingling with the residual warmth of torches and candlelight. Charles V, the Wise, seems both distant and intimate, a monarch whose curiosity bridged intellect and sensation, blending subtle recreational pleasure with meticulous study. Fringe tales of his tea ceremonies, whispered among courtiers or chroniclers, hint at nights filled with quiet experimentation, laughter, and reflection. Historians still argue over the authenticity and purpose of these indulgences, yet the sensory tapestry is undeniable. You inhale the imagined aromas, feel the warmth of candlelight on your skin, and sense the delicate thrill of stepping into a royal world where wisdom and indulgence coexisted in fragrant harmony. You glide into the grand, echoing halls of Henry VIII's palace, where the rich aroma of roasted meats, spiced wine, and, faintly, the sweet smoke of tobacco mingles with the ever-present chill of cold stone. Henry, a larger-than-life monarch, is famous for his appetites, and not just for food or women. Late in life, he developed a fondness for tobacco, a novelty imported from the New World, smoking it through pipes that were as much status symbols as they were tools of indulgence. Historians still argue whether his use of tobacco contributed to his volatile temper or merely offered moments of rare relaxation. But tonight, you let yourself imagine both the puff of smoke curling upward as a tension-relieving exhalation in a palace otherwise dominated by intrigue and ceremony. Imagine Henry seated in a dimly lit chamber, his broad figure silhouetted against flickering torches, a finely carved pipe in hand. Fringe tales suggest he sometimes infused tobacco with herbs, creating mixtures that could soothe headaches or simply provide a pleasant buzz. The faint scent of burning leaves mingles with roasted meats and sweet wine, creating a sensory cocktail both comforting and slightly intoxicating. Courtiers, ever wary of the king's moods, might exchange subtle glances as smoke curls lazily toward the ceiling, whispering prayers that the king's indulgence remains calm and reflective. Scholars still debate whether Henry's tobacco habit was a casual vice or an essential coping mechanism, yet the image of him reclining and savoring the aroma is vivid. In the palace gardens, the early evening air is cool, carrying the scent of crushed herbs and distant flower beds. Henry reportedly enjoyed brief strolls here, pipe in hand, the smoke blending with lavender and rosemary growing nearby. Fringe accounts hint that he sometimes hosted intimate gatherings with close advisors or favorites, sampling the latest tobacco blends while discussing politics, poetry, or court gossip. Historians still argue about the extent to which such recreational use influenced the court's atmosphere, but you can almost feel the subtle shift in tension as attendants and advisors inhale the faint aroma, their nerves eased just slightly by the king's indulgence. Inside the royal chambers, jars of herbs, powders, and leaves line the shelves, some used medicinally, some for scent, and some, according to Fringe stories, mixed into tobacco for a more intense experience. You can imagine Henry carefully measuring a pinch, lighting it, and inhaling deeply while pondering a letter from a distant ambassador. Scholars still debate whether the king's tobacco use was purely pleasurable or functional, perhaps soothing chronic pains or stress, but the sensory tableau is undeniable. Warm glow from the fire, the earthy aroma of smoke, and the sense of a monarch temporarily at ease. You pass through a hallway adorned with tapestries depicting hunts and battles, the faint scent of herbs lingering like a memory of past indulgences. Fringe tales claim that Henry sometimes experimented with combining tobacco smoke and wine for a double-layered sensory experience, though historians caution that these stories may be exaggerated. Yet you can almost picture it. A king taking a measured puff, swirling a goblet of spiced wine, and letting the world soften around him. The juxtaposition of fiery temper and delicate indulgence feels almost cinematic, a reminder that even the most imposing rulers had their quiet escapes. In a smaller, secluded chamber, the king reportedly engaged in solitary reflection, pipe in hand, inhaling the subtle blend of tobacco and herbs. Fringe accounts hint at playful experimentation, comparing blends and noting effects on mood or perception. Scholars still debate the reliability of these anecdotes, but you can sense the human side of the monarch, a man seeking calm and sensory pleasure in the midst of heavy responsibility and constant scrutiny. The room seems to hum with quiet warmth, scented with smoke and wax, a gentle contrast to the rigid expectations of the throne. Finally, as you drift toward the balcony overlooking the sprawling palace grounds, moonlight catching the neatly trimmed hedges and fountains, you imagine Henry taking one last puff before the night fully settles. The subtle mixture of smoke, night air, and lingering aromas of herbs and wine creates a moment of fleeting serenity. Fringe reports suggest he occasionally shared these indulgences with trusted favorites, a rare mingling of personal pleasure and courtly camaraderie. Historians still argue whether such moments were frequent or merely romanticized stories, but tonight you allow the imagery to fill your senses. The warmth of candlelight, the cool stone beneath your fingers, the delicate curl of smoke rising toward the moon, and the quiet, intimate pleasure of a king momentarily free from the weight of empire. You drift through the labyrinthine corridors of Catherine de' Medici's palace, the air rich with the mingled aromas of crushed herbs, incense, and the faint sweetness of wine. Catherine, renowned for her political cunning, also had a taste for herbal elixirs, some calming, some subtly intoxicating, and some rumored to induce mild hallucinations. Fringe accounts suggest she experimented with these concoctions both for personal pleasure and to manipulate moods at court. Historians still debate whether Catherine's potions were primarily medicinal, recreational, or tactical tools. But you let yourself wander among the possibilities, inhaling the imagined scents and picturing candlelight flickering on gilded walls. Imagine her in a private chamber, surrounded by vials of crushed herbs, flowers, and exotic ingredients. She reportedly combined ingredients like lavender, mugwort, and even a touch of opium in careful, measured doses, testing effects on herself and occasionally on unsuspecting courtiers. Fringe stories hint at evenings spent sampling these brews with trusted allies, evaluating both flavor and subtle psychological impact. You can almost hear the delicate clink of glass as a vial is opened, the faint hiss of steam rising from a small cauldron, and the soft murmur of confidants speculating whether the potion will induce calm, laughter, or creative thought. Scholars still argue whether these accounts exaggerate her habits or reflect actual practice, but the sensory imagery is intoxicating. You wander into her herb garden, tucked behind high walls and illuminated by faint moonlight. Rows of lavender, rosemary, and other aromatic plants sway gently in the night breeze, releasing subtle fragrances. Catherine reportedly used these gardens not only for beauty, but as sources for her potions, sometimes crushing leaves between her fingers to release their aroma or steeping them in wine and water. Fringe accounts suggest she might have hosted private experimentation nights with trusted companions, where the line between medicine, leisure, and mild intoxication blurred. Historians still debate how much of this is myth versus reality, but you let the night air, scented with crushed herbs, draw you deeper into her world. Inside the palace chambers, jars of powders and tinctures line the shelves, meticulously labeled and arranged. Catherine's alchemical curiosity reportedly extended to creating subtle effects on herself or others, calming, invigorating, or even mildly hallucinogenic. Fringe tales claim she tested the influence of aroma and taste on courtly behavior, blending sensory pleasure with subtle political calculation. Scholars still argue whether these practices were widespread or isolated to her personal indulgences, but you can almost feel the soft warmth of candlelight on your skin as you imagine her carefully measuring powders, inhaling the fragrance, and smiling at the delicate effects. You wander past tapestries depicting French victories and royal hunts, the faint scent of herbs lingering like an invisible thread. Catherine's potions reportedly sometimes served as tools to set the mood of a gathering, subtly influencing conversation and decision-making. Fringe anecdotes whisper of mild herbal fumes drifting into council chambers, altering perception just enough to soften tempers or stimulate creative debate. Historians still debate the factual accuracy, but you can picture a hushed chamber, courtiers inhaling a faint aroma, unaware that their emotional state has been subtly guided by the queen's meticulous planning. In the smaller, private alcoves of the palace, the aroma of crushed herbs intensifies, mingling with wax and faint traces of wine. Catherine reportedly spent hours experimenting with combinations that would induce calm, laughter, or fleeting visions, carefully noting outcomes in private ledgers. Fringe stories claim that she sometimes invited only a single confidant to share in these trials, creating intimate moments of trust, curiosity, and gentle amusement. Scholars still argue whether these anecdotes reflect genuine practice or clever embellishment, but the image is vivid. Candlelight flickering on walls, the subtle hiss of steaming herbs, and quiet, shared laughter drifting through the night. Finally, as you step onto a balcony overlooking the gardens, the moonlight catching silver leaves and marble fountains, you imagine Catherine inhaling the night air, mingled with subtle herbal aromas. Fringe accounts suggest that some of her concoctions were designed to elevate creativity or mood, while others simply offered private relaxation. Historians still argue about the frequency and intent of her experiments, yet the sensory scene remains palpable. A queen of intelligence, intrigue, and quiet indulgence, blending science, art, and pleasure in ways both subtle and intoxicating. You inhale the imagined fragrance, feel the cool stone underfoot, and sense the soft, secretive thrill of walking through her fragrant, candlelit world, a place where knowledge and sensory delight entwine seamlessly. You tread softly into the grand halls of James I of England, where the flickering torchlight reflects off dark oak paneling and the faint scent of tobacco and herbs hangs in the air. James, a king famous for his writings and political maneuvering, had an equally notorious penchant for tobacco. Imported from the New World, it was both an exotic novelty and a personal indulgence. Fringe accounts suggest he occasionally added opiates to his pipes, creating mild but intriguing effects, though historians still argue whether these stories are exaggerations or reflect actual practice. Tonight, you let yourself picture both possibilities, inhaling the imagined aroma and feeling the subtle haze of history envelop you. In a quiet chamber, James reclines on a velvet chaise, a finely crafted pipe cradled in his hands. The tobacco, sometimes mixed with aromatic herbs, curls smoke into the air in lazy spirals. Fringe anecdotes hint that the king enjoyed experimenting with mixtures, noting the effects on mood, thought, and conversation. You can almost hear a scribe in the corner whispering about the latest literary debate or political maneuver, while James inhales deeply, letting the warmth of the smoke soften the edges of courtly tension. Scholars still debate the extent of these indulgences, whether purely recreational or a form of stress relief, but the image is vivid, a monarch at once intellectual, curious, and quietly human. The palace gardens, faintly illuminated by moonlight, release scents of crushed herbs and flowers that mingle with a subtle trace of tobacco smoke. James reportedly appreciated the sensory interplay between these fragrances and the aroma of his pipe, occasionally inviting close friends to stroll and sample mild infusions. Fringe reports suggest that these gatherings, part private ritual and part social experiment, sometimes induced gentle laughter or reflective moods among participants. Historians still argue whether such rituals were widespread or limited to select favorites. But you can imagine the soft rustle of leaves and the faint giggles of confidants, all under the king's watchful yet relaxed presence. Inside the royal chambers, rows of jars and vials line the shelves, containing dried herbs, aromatic spices, and substances used in both medicinal and recreational concoctions. James reportedly experimented with combinations, testing effects on himself and occasionally on companions. Fringe stories hint at quiet competitions to see which blend produced the most soothing or uplifting effect, though scholars caution the reliability of these tales. Still, you can picture the smoke curling in intricate patterns toward the ceiling, the faint scent of lavender or sage mingling with tobacco, and the gentle exhale of a monarch who seeks both intellectual and sensory stimulation. Walking through the library, faint echoes of debate and scholarship linger among the stacks of leather-bound tomes. James, ever the student and poet, reportedly used the calming effects of his indulgences to enhance focus and creativity. Fringe accounts suggest mild hallucinations or dreamy states occurred occasionally, inspiring poetry, philosophical musings, or witticisms shared with trusted companions. Scholars still argue whether these effects were significant or merely anecdotal embellishments, but the mental image is strong. Candlelight flickering across faces, the aroma of smoked herbs and finely prepared blends mingling, a gentle hush broken only by laughter or thoughtful exclamation. You drift toward a private alcove where the king might retreat, pipe in hand, inhaling the familiar fragrance of crushed leaves and aromatic mixtures. Fringe tales hint at secret, almost ritualistic practices, blending sensory pleasure with intellectual exercise. Historians still debate the authenticity of these reports, yet the scene remains compelling. A monarch alone or with a confidant, enjoying subtle effects, contemplating policy, poetry, or philosophy while the castle hums softly in the background. The delicate curl of smoke, the faint sweetness of herbs, and the warmth of candlelight make the space feel intimate, reflective, and surprisingly modern in its sensory indulgence. Finally, As you imagine stepping onto a balcony overlooking the palace, the night air cool and carrying the faint aroma of gardens and distant fireplaces, James inhales deeply, one last time. Fringe anecdotes suggest these quiet indulgences shaped both mood and thought, while historians still debate the degree to which they influence daily life. You sense the subtle thrill of intimacy and secrecy in his actions, the gentle, aromatic haze of smoke curling into the night, and the delicate pleasure of a monarch quietly enjoying his world, blending intellectual curiosity with sensory delight. The image lingers as the palace settles into night, the smoke dissipating slowly, leaving behind memory, fragrance, and the faint echo of curiosity fulfilled. You wander into the softly lit corridors of Elizabeth I's palace, the flicker of torches casting long shadows across tapestries depicting naval victories and regal pageantry. The air is tinged with the subtle aroma of crushed herbs, scented oils, and perhaps a faint trace of something more experimental. Elizabeth reportedly enjoyed sipping mysterious herbal teas crafted from blends of imported flowers, local herbs, and occasionally more adventurous ingredients. Historians still argue whether she used them purely for medicinal purposes, as a form of theatrical sophistication, or for private recreational enjoyment. But tonight, you let yourself imagine all three possibilities, inhaling the imagined fragrance and feeling the palace come alive around you. Imagine Elizabeth in a quiet chamber, perched elegantly on a velvet cushion, a small porcelain cup cradled delicately in her hands. Fringe accounts suggest that some of her teas were infused with mild psychoactive properties, creating a sense of relaxation, gentle euphoria, or even brief creative inspiration. The faint steam rises in curling tendrils, carrying aromas of rose, lavender, and herbs from distant lands. Courtiers moving quietly through the room might catch a wisp of scent and glance knowingly, though only the most trusted companions shared in these secret indulgences. Scholars still debate whether these stories are factual or embellished, but the imagery is striking. A queen of intellect and performance, quietly experimenting with sensory pleasure. In the palace gardens, moonlight illuminates carefully arranged beds of aromatic plants, their fragrances blending in the cool night air. Elizabeth reportedly appreciated not only the taste of her herbal teas, but also the effects of inhaling the crushed leaves and flowers. Fringe anecdotes suggest that small, private gatherings took place here, where select courtiers sampled blends alongside the queen, perhaps to enhance conversation or induce subtle moods. Historians still argue whether such sensory experiments influenced her decision-making or were merely leisure pursuits. But the scene is vivid. Silver light on petals, gentle rustle of leaves, faint giggles echoing in hidden corners. Inside the royal chambers, jars of dried herbs, powders, and flowers line shelves, carefully labeled and organized. Elizabeth reportedly tested combinations designed to calm nerves, enhance focus, or spark brief moments of euphoria. Fringe stories hint that some teas had the additional effect of sharpening perception or creative thinking, inspiring poetry, diplomatic insights, or witty commentary. Scholars still debate the extent of these practices and whether they were routine or occasional indulgences, but you can imagine the faint curl of steam from a cup, the aroma mingling with the soft warmth of candlelight, and the quiet hum of attentive courtiers. You drift through a hallway adorned with portraits of ancestors and naval victories, the scent of herbs lingering like a memory. Fringe accounts suggest that Elizabeth's teas were sometimes combined with aromatics, like lavender or crushed flowers, to produce subtle effects that encouraged calm or thoughtful discussion. Historians still argue about the veracity and intent of these rituals, but you can almost feel the quiet thrill of discretion, the pleasure of knowing that even the monarch could indulge privately, blending sensory delight with the subtle theater of courtly life. In a small, secluded alcove, the faint warmth of candlelight illuminates a collection of cups and vials, their contents fragrant and inviting. Elizabeth reportedly spent hours experimenting, inhaling aromas, tasting blends, and observing their subtle influence on mood and perception. Fringe accounts hint at the occasional private consultation with an herbalist or confidant, testing the effects of different ingredients on thought and creativity. Scholars still argue whether these sessions were practical, recreational, or ceremonial, but the image remains compelling. A queen weaving sensory pleasure into the fabric of governance, her curiosity and intellect inseparable. Finally, as you step onto a balcony overlooking the gardens and the quiet city beyond, the cool night air mingles with the soft fragrance of crushed herbs. Elizabeth inhales deeply, the aroma a gentle companion to the moonlight glinting on marble fountains and trimmed hedges. Fringe anecdotes suggest that these quiet moments inspired reflection, conversation, and subtle creativity. While historians still debate their significance, you sense the layered intimacy of scent, warmth, and secret indulgence, the delicate pleasure of a monarch who balanced intellect, ceremony, and sensory delight. The night hums softly around you, carrying the faint trace of her herbal experiments and the whispered echoes of Elizabeth's quietly playful, thoughtful world. You drift into the shadowed corridors of Louis XIV's sprawling Versailles, the palace alive with the faint scent of lavender, rosemary, and the opulent perfumes that defined his court. The Sun King, renowned for his meticulous control and grandeur, reportedly had a fascination with various herbal concoctions and aromatic experiments. Some fringe accounts claim that he occasionally indulged in mild intoxicants or teas infused with calming herbs to manage the endless pressures of court life. Historians still argue whether these indulgences were recreational, medicinal, or purely ceremonial. But tonight, you let yourself imagine all three, inhaling the imagined mixture of scents as you wander past gilded mirrors and glittering chandeliers. Picture Louis seated in a private chamber, silk robes cascading over a chaise, a delicate cup of herbal tea in hand. The beverage might have been infused with lavender, thyme, or even a touch of hemp, its aroma curling upward as candlelight flickers against ornate walls. Fringe tales suggest that the king sometimes shared these private indulgences with a trusted few, observing their reactions to subtle combinations, though historians caution that such reports may be exaggerated. Still, the mental image is compelling, a monarch both commanding and quietly playful, inhaling the warm fragrance, allowing the stresses of governance to melt into the aromatic haze. In the palace gardens, meticulously trimmed and illuminated by moonlight, Louis reportedly arranged aromatic plants not only for beauty, but for sensory enjoyment. Lavender, rosemary, and other fragrant herbs mingled with the faint scent of crushed flowers, creating a soothing environment where he might stroll alone or with confidants. Fringe anecdotes claim that he sometimes experimented with herbal infusions during evening promenades, inhaling deeply while discussing politics, art, or the latest court intrigue. Historians still debate whether these moments were private leisure or subtle demonstrations of cultivated taste, but the sensory image is vivid: soft rustle of leaves, gentle laughter, and the faint curl of aromatic smoke drifting in the night air. Inside the palace chambers, jars of dried herbs and powders line shelves in meticulous order. Louis reportedly experimented with mild sedatives and aromatic blends, perhaps to ease tension before elaborate ceremonies or late-night meetings with ministers. Fringe reports suggest that some concoctions were intended to sharpen perception or encourage relaxation, though scholars continue to argue the extent to which these were practiced versus rumored. You can almost hear the faint clink of cups and the hiss of steam from warming infusions, the soft glow of candlelight reflecting off gilded surfaces, and the quiet murmur of trusted courtiers sharing a private, fragrant ritual with their king. Walking past long galleries adorned with portraits and trophies, the faint aroma of herbs lingers in the air like a ghost of indulgence. Louis reportedly used these sensory experiences strategically, blending aesthetics, fragrance, and mild herbal effects to influence mood or create subtle ambiance. Fringe tales hint at intimate sessions where the king evaluated combinations of scent and taste, noting subtle effects on focus, relaxation, or creativity. Historians still argue about the accuracy and frequency of these practices, but you can imagine the elegant dance of sensory, pleasure, and controlled power candlelight reflecting in a polished goblet as the faint fragrance of herbs mingles with the soft warmth of the evening. In a smaller, secluded room, the king might retreat with a steaming cup of herbal tea, inhaling aromas carefully prepared by a trusted herbalist. Fringe accounts suggest occasional experiments with minor intoxicants or exotic leaves designed to calm nerves or inspire subtle reflection. Scholars continue to debate the veracity of these anecdotes, yet you can sense the quiet delight. Louis, observing the rising steam, inhaling the complex aroma, and letting the sensory experience dissolve the tension of court life. The space seems alive with quiet warmth, scented with crushed herbs and faint wax, a gentle counterpoint to the rigidity of royal protocol. Finally, as you step onto a balcony overlooking the moonlit gardens, fountains sparkling in silver light, you can almost feel the soft waft of lavender and crushed herbs mingling with night air. Fringe tales suggest that Louis's sensory experiments offered moments of reflection, private delight, and subtle social influence, while historians still debate the specifics. You sense the delicate pleasure of a monarch who balanced grand spectacle with intimate indulgence, blending aroma, taste, and quiet experimentation into the orchestration of daily life. The night hums softly, carrying hints of crushed herbs, candle wax, and whispered laughter, a sensory imprint of the Sun King's private, quietly playful world. You step quietly into the candlelit corridors of Peter the Great's Russian palace, the chill of stone floors underfoot contrasting with the warm glow of oil lamps. Peter, known for his towering ambition and relentless modernization of Russia, had a surprisingly curious and experimental side when it came to personal indulgences. Fringe accounts hint that he dabbled in herbal infusions and imported recreational substances, blending medicinal necessity with sensory pleasure. Historians still argue whether these indulgences were common practice or rare private experiments, but you allow the image to unfold. A giant of a man, both ruler and experimenter, inhaling the scents of herbs while contemplating reforms that would change a nation. Imagine him in a private chamber, heavy robes draped over a chair, a steaming cup of herbal infusion cradled in his hands. Reports suggest he sometimes combined native herbs like mint and chamomile with imported leaves for subtle effects, creating a beverage that was both calming and mildly stimulating. Fringe stories claim he occasionally added small amounts of opiates or other exotic substances, though scholars still debate the accuracy. You can almost hear the faint hiss of steam, the soft clink of a silver cup set on a wooden table, and the quiet exhale of a monarch temporarily freed from the pressures of empire. The palace gardens, carefully arranged yet expansive, emit a faint, complex fragrance of crushed herbs and flowers. Peter reportedly experimented here as well, sometimes strolling alone or with a trusted companion, inhaling the aromas while discussing naval construction, military strategy, or new inventions. Fringe anecdotes suggest he occasionally hosted private experimentation walks to observe effects on mood and focus, though historians remain skeptical. Still, the mental picture is compelling. Moonlight catching dew on leaves, the faint rustle of plants in the breeze, and Peter pausing to inhale, savoring both the aroma and the calm it brought. Inside the palace chambers, shelves are lined with jars of dried herbs, tinctures, and powders. Peter reportedly enjoyed experimenting with combinations to test effects on energy, focus, or relaxation. Fringe reports hint that some concoctions produced mild euphoric sensations or heightened alertness, while others were purely aromatic. Scholars still debate the frequency and purpose of these indulgences, but the sensory image remains vivid. Warm steam rising, subtle aromas curling in the air, and a monarch fully engaged in the tactile and aromatic pleasures of experimentation. Walking past portraits of ancestors and military victories, the faint scent of herbs lingers like a ghost of private indulgence. Peter reportedly balanced sensory pleasure with practical experimentation, blending herbal infusions into evenings spent discussing governance, industry, or naval logistics. Fringe accounts suggest occasional discreet gatherings where trusted aides participated in tasting or inhaling the effects, though historians still argue about reliability. You can almost hear the quiet laughter or thoughtful murmurs, the faint smell of crushed leaves, and the subtle tension of curiosity interlaced with authority. In a small, secluded alcove, the king might recline with a cup of steaming herbal tea, inhaling aromas carefully prepared to stimulate or relax. Fringe tales hint at deliberate experimentation, measuring effects on mood, creativity, or relaxation. Scholars continue to debate the veracity of these reports, yet you can sense the quiet intimacy. Peter observing the rising steam, inhaling deeply, and allowing a rare moment of indulgence amid the ceaseless demands of ruling. The room feels alive with warmth and aroma, a subtle retreat from the harshness of the larger palace. Finally, stepping onto a balcony that overlooks the sprawling gardens and distant city lights, the cool night air carries a mix of crushed herbs, faint smoke, and distant floral scents. Peter reportedly took pleasure in inhaling these fragrances, savoring moments of quiet reflection and experimentation. Fringe accounts suggest that these indulgences sometimes inspired thought or conversation, while historians still debate specifics. You sense the delicate pleasure of a monarch balancing power, curiosity, and personal sensory delight, the fragrant night whispering around you as you imagine Peter's giant frame silhouetted against moonlit gardens, a ruler experimenting quietly with the small, intoxicating pleasures of life. You step into the shadowed, torch-lit halls of Philip II of Spain, the austere and devout king whose private indulgences contrast sharply with his public persona. The scent of crushed herbs, faint incense, and spiced wine drifts through the corridors, hinting at a side of Philip rarely discussed in history books. Fringe accounts suggest that he occasionally enjoyed mild herbal infusions, sometimes mixed with wine or honey, to ease stress and stimulate reflection. Historians still debate whether these practices were recreational, medicinal, or ceremonial. But tonight, you allow the imagined aroma and warmth to pull you deeper into his private world. Picture Philip seated at a heavy oak table, candlelight reflecting off polished surfaces, a small cup of herbal concoction steaming gently in front of him. Herbs like sage, rosemary, and lavender were reportedly favorites, sometimes combined with imported spices or minor intoxicants. Fringe tales claim that he occasionally hosted private tastings with trusted advisors, noting effects on mood or clarity of thought. Scholars still argue whether these sessions occurred frequently or were isolated indulgences, but the mental image is vivid. A king absorbed, the faint fragrance curling upward, balancing devotion, duty, and a discreet taste of sensory pleasure. In the gardens, moonlight illuminates orderly rows of aromatic plants, their scents drifting through the cool night air. Philip reportedly enjoyed strolling here, inhaling deeply, and sometimes experimenting with mild teas or infusions. Fringe anecdotes suggest he occasionally invited a few confidants to share in these experiences, quietly observing the effects on calmness, reflection, or even amusement. Historians still argue about the accuracy and frequency of these gatherings, yet you can almost hear the soft rustle of leaves, the faint murmur of conversation, and the subtle, intoxicating scent of crushed herbs mingling with night air. Inside the private chambers, jars and vials of herbs, powders, and tinctures line the shelves. Philip reportedly measured his concoctions carefully, some for medicinal purposes and some for discreet indulgence. Fringe accounts hint at the occasional infusion of mildly stimulating or calming herbs, producing effects that range from quiet reflection to gentle euphoria. Scholars debate whether these practices were routine or ceremonial, but you can imagine the faint curl of steam rising from a cup, the aroma mixing with candle wax, and the soft exhale of a monarch who briefly escapes the weight of empire. You drift past tapestries depicting Spanish victories and royal lineage, the subtle scent of herbs lingering like a ghostly companion. Philip's private indulgences, reportedly, combined sensory pleasure with mild experimentation, perhaps testing effects on mood, alertness, or relaxation. Fringe stories whisper of evenings spent sampling teas with a trusted advisor, quietly comparing reactions or noting subtle changes in perception. Historians still argue about the accuracy of these accounts, but the scene is vivid. Candlelight flickering on attentive faces, warm steam curling toward the ceiling, and faint aromas mingling in an atmosphere of controlled curiosity. In a secluded alcove, Philip might recline with his steaming cup, inhaling deeply while observing the faint play of light on polished surfaces. Fringe tales suggest occasional minor intoxicants were included, though scholars remain skeptical. You can almost sense the quiet delight and concentration, the balance of sensory pleasure and disciplined thought, and the faint tension of secrecy adding a subtle thrill to his indulgence. The room hums gently with warmth, scent, and the quiet breath of a monarch exploring a hidden side of life. Finally, as you step onto a balcony overlooking the gardens and softly lit city beyond, the night air carries a mixture of crushed herbs, faint incense, and cool moonlight. Philip reportedly enjoyed inhaling these fragrances, allowing moments of quiet reflection or subtle pleasure. Fringe accounts hint at small, intimate gatherings, while historians continue to debate their authenticity. You feel the layered serenity and discreet indulgence, imagining the austere king softened by scent and quiet contemplation, a ruler balancing power, devotion, and private sensory delight under the moonlit sky. You wander through the grand echoing halls of Charles II of England, the merry monarch, whose reputation for indulgence precedes him. The air is thick with the mingling aromas of spiced wine, crushed herbs, and the faint tang of pipe smoke. Charles reportedly had a particular fondness for tobacco, imported from the New World, which he smoked not only for leisure but as a tool to unwind after the relentless drama of court life. Fringe accounts suggest he sometimes infused it with mild herbs to enhance relaxation or produce subtle euphoria. Historians still argue whether these indulgences were excessive or typical for royal recreation, but you allow yourself to wander in the fragrant haze of his private world. Picture Charles reclining on a velvet settee in a dimly lit chamber, a carved pipe in hand, the tip glowing faintly as he draws a slow puff. Fringe tales hint at experimental blends, a touch of lavender here, a hint of mint there, each creating delicate shifts in mood or perception. Courtiers tread lightly around him, aware that laughter, wit, and charm often accompany his indulgences, yet none dare interrupt the king's private pleasure. Scholars still debate the extent to which these habits influence his decision-making or creativity, but the imagery is rich. Candlelight flickering against paneled walls, smoke curling upward, and the quiet exhale of a monarch who truly knows how to savor small joys. In the palace gardens, moonlight catches dewy leaves of lavender, sage, and other aromatic herbs. Charles reportedly enjoyed strolling here with a small group of confidants, sometimes sipping mild herbal infusions alongside his pipe. Fringe anecdotes claim that these sessions were a mix of leisure and playful experimentation, observing the effects of different blends on mood and conversation. Historians still argue whether such gatherings were widespread or reserved for a select few, but the mental picture is vivid. Gentle laughter, the soft rustle of leaves, and the mingling of fragrance with the cool night air. Inside the royal chambers, jars of dried herbs, powders, and tinctures line the shelves, meticulously labeled and organized. Charles reportedly experimented with combinations designed to relax, amuse, or subtly stimulate conversation. Fringe reports hint that some concoctions might have induced mild euphoria or enhanced focus, though scholars still debate their accuracy. You can almost hear the faint hiss of steaming liquids, the soft clink of glass, and the delicate interplay of aroma and mood as the king inhales deeply, savoring each sensory note. Walking past tapestries depicting battle scenes and royal triumphs, the subtle scent of herbs lingers like an invisible companion. Charles reportedly enjoyed blending sensory pleasure with subtle social experimentation, noting how aromas, tastes, and mild stimulation affected his court. Fringe stories hint at playful competitions among trusted companions, comparing reactions to different herbal blends or pipe mixtures. Historians still argue about the extent and purpose of these indulgences, but the scene is vivid. Candlelight reflecting off polished surfaces, gentle laughter, and the soft, curling tendrils of fragrant smoke drifting through the air. In a secluded alcove, Charles might recline with his pipe and cup of herbal infusion, inhaling the fragrant steam as he observes the quiet movement of his palace. Fringe accounts suggest occasional mild intoxicants were part of the experience, producing fleeting moments of elevated thought or relaxed mirth. Scholars continue to debate the veracity, yet you can sense the intimate pleasure, the balance of indulgence and observation, and the quiet warmth of candlelight and scent that defines this hidden corner of royal life. Finally, as you step onto a balcony overlooking the sprawling gardens and softly lit city, the night air carries the mingled fragrance of crushed herbs, smoke, and distant blossoms. Charles reportedly inhaled deeply, savoring moments of relaxation, subtle amusement, and private delight. Fringe accounts hint at small, intimate gatherings that were carefully orchestrated, while historians continue to argue about their accuracy. You feel the delicate pleasure of a king who lived publicly with bravado yet privately cherished sensory indulgence, a monarch whose laughter, fragrance, and gentle experimentation linger in the quiet night air. You slip quietly into the candlelit corridors of Frederick the Great's palace, the Prussian king whose strict public persona belied a private penchant for sensory indulgence. The air is faintly fragrant with crushed herbs, floral oils, and the distant aroma of strong wine. Frederick reportedly enjoyed herbal infusions and carefully crafted teas, sometimes infused with mildly psychoactive herbs to ease tension or stimulate thought. Fringe accounts suggest he occasionally experimented with these concoctions while playing music or composing, though historians still argue whether this was a common habit or a rare indulgence. Tonight, you let yourself wander into the imagined aroma-filled world of a king, both disciplined and quietly experimental. Imagine Frederick seated in a private chamber, candlelight flickering across gilt mirrors and polished wood, a small porcelain cup of steaming herbal tea in hand. Herbs like chamomile, mint, and perhaps imported flowers rise in delicate fragrance, curling into the air. Fringe tales claim he occasionally experimented with subtle intoxicants or psychoactive herbs, using them to inspire creative thought or soften the rigidity of his temperament. Scholars still debate the extent of these indulgences, yet the image is vivid. A monarch absorbed, inhaling deeply, a faint smile playing across his lips as the calming aroma wraps around him. In the palace gardens, moonlight glints off meticulously trimmed hedges, fountains, and rows of fragrant herbs. Frederick reportedly appreciated not only the taste, but the aroma of these plants, sometimes strolling alone or with a trusted companion while sipping mild herbal infusions. Fringe anecdotes suggest these walks could include small experiments, observing the subtle effects of aromas on mood, reflection, or conversation. Historians still argue about the frequency and purpose of such practices, but you can almost hear the faint rustle of leaves, the soft splash of fountains, and the gentle laughter of confidants sharing quiet moments in the cool night air. Inside the royal chambers, rows of jars and vials contain dried herbs, tinctures, and powders meticulously labeled. Frederick reportedly combined these with care, experimenting with subtle blends designed to calm, stimulate, or inspire. Fringe reports hint that some mixtures were mildly intoxicating or euphoric, while others were purely sensory. Scholars still debate the veracity and regularity of these practices, yet the sensory imagery is clear. Warm steam rising from delicate cups, the scent of herbs mingling with wax and polished wood, and the quiet hum of a monarch immersed in private indulgence. Walking past portraits of ancestors and battle scenes, the faint scent of herbs lingers like a gentle companion. Frederick's indulgences reportedly combined sensory pleasure with experimentation, allowing him moments of calm reflection or creative spark amid the strict discipline of his court. Fringe stories hint at private sessions with select confidants, testing aromatic effects or subtly amusing themselves with reactions to new blends. Historians still argue the accuracy of these tales, but the scene is rich. Candlelight reflecting softly on polished surfaces, fragrant steam curling toward the ceiling, and the quiet interplay of curiosity, intellect, and sensory delight. In a secluded alcove, the king might recline, cup in hand, inhaling the gentle, aromatic steam. Fringe accounts suggest that these indulgences sometimes produced fleeting euphoria, heightened creativity, or gentle calm, though scholars remain skeptical. You can sense the quiet pleasure, the controlled indulgence, and the delicate interplay of fragrance, warmth, and thought in Frederick's private world. The room hums softly with candlelight and aroma, a subtle retreat from the strictness of duty. Finally, stepping onto a balcony that overlooks the moonlit gardens and distant city lights, the night air carries the mingled fragrance of crushed herbs and distant blossoms. Frederick reportedly inhaled deeply, savoring moments of quiet indulgence, reflection, and subtle sensory pleasure. Fringe anecdotes hint at discreet shared experiences with trusted companions, while historians continue to debate the details. You feel the layered intimacy and understated delight, imagining a king whose disciplined exterior hid a quietly experimental, fragrance-filled, sensory-rich private life. You move through the opulent, torch-lit halls of Maria Theresa's Austrian court, the formidable empress whose presence exudes both authority and meticulous grace. The faint scent of crushed herbs, rosewater, and spiced wine lingers in the air, hinting at a softer side rarely discussed in formal histories. Maria Theresa reportedly enjoyed herbal infusions and aromatic baths, blending medicinal and recreational practices into her daily life. Fringe accounts suggest that some of these concoctions were mildly intoxicating or mood-enhancing, though historians still argue whether these were occasional indulgences or a steady ritual. Tonight, you drift into the imagined sensory world of an empress both commanding and quietly experimental. Picture Maria Theresa seated in a private boudoir, soft candlelight reflecting on polished wood and gilded mirrors, a delicate cup of herbal tea in hand. Lavender, chamomile, and imported floral petals rise in gentle steam, filling the room with a soothing fragrance. Fringe tales claim she occasionally experimented with subtle stimulants or calming herbs, using them to maintain composure during long days of governance or to inspire reflection. Scholars still debate the frequency and purpose of these practices, but the image is clear: an empress quietly enjoying a fragrant, private ritual, savoring the aroma and warmth as the world outside waits for her commands. In the palace gardens, moonlight illuminates neat rows of aromatic plants, fountains, and flowering shrubs. Maria Theresa reportedly strolled here with trusted companions, sometimes sipping herbal teas or inhaling the fragrance of crushed leaves. Fringe anecdotes suggest these walks occasionally included small experiments, testing the effects of aromas and infusions on mood, alertness, or subtle amusement. Historians still argue about the veracity and significance of these practices, but you can almost hear the soft rustle of leaves, the faint splash of water, and the quiet laughter of courtiers sharing a private moment with their sovereign. Inside her chambers, jars of dried herbs, flowers, and tinctures are arranged with meticulous precision. Maria Theresa reportedly tested combinations designed to calm nerves, enhance reflection, or gently elevate mood. Fringe reports hint that some infusions could produce mild euphoria or sensory delight, though scholars still debate the reliability of these accounts. You can imagine the steam rising from a cup, the delicate aroma mingling with candle wax and polished wood, and the subtle pleasure of an empress quietly absorbed in her private indulgence. Walking past portraits of ancestors and ceremonial regalia, the faint scent of herbs lingers like a whispered memory. Maria Theresa's indulgences reportedly combined sensory pleasure with careful experimentation, allowing her moments of reflection or gentle amusement amid the demands of statecraft. Fringe stories hint at discreet tasting sessions with trusted confidants, quietly observing the subtle effects of each aromatic blend. Historians still argue the accuracy of these tales, but the sensory imagery remains vivid: flickering candlelight, warm steam rising from delicate cups, and the soft interplay of aroma, thought, and quiet delight. In a secluded alcove, the empress might recline with her cup of tea, inhaling the fragrant steam as she contemplates political correspondence or personal reflection. Fringe accounts suggest occasional mild intoxicants or exotic herbs were used, though scholars remain skeptical. You can sense the delicate pleasure, the balance of authority and sensory indulgence, and the intimate warmth of candlelight and aroma surrounding her private world. Finally, as you step onto a balcony overlooking moonlit gardens and softly lit courtyards, the night air carries the mingled scents of crushed herbs, distant blossoms, and the faint echo of water from fountains. Maria Theresa reportedly inhaled deeply, savoring moments of reflection, gentle indulgence, and subtle sensory pleasure. Fringe anecdotes hint at small, private gatherings with trusted companions, while historians continue to debate the specifics. You feel the layered intimacy and quiet delight, imagining an empress whose commanding presence was balanced by private rituals of fragrance, taste, and personal indulgence in the soft moonlight. You glide through the candlelit corridors of Louis XV's palace at Versailles, the king whose court became synonymous with excess, intrigue, and sensory indulgence. The air is thick with the mingled scents of rosewater, crushed herbs, spiced wine, and the faint hint of tobacco. Louis XV reportedly had a keen appreciation for herbal infusions, aromatic baths, and mild intoxicants, blending relaxation and recreation into the art of ruling. Fringe accounts suggest he sometimes experimented with exotic blends to enhance mood or stimulate conversation. Historians still argue whether these indulgences were occasional diversions or regular rituals, but tonight you step into the imagined world of a monarch who delighted in private sensory pleasures. Picture Louis XV in a softly lit chamber, silk draped around him, a delicate cup of herbal tea steaming in his hand. Lavender, rosemary, and rare imported flowers scent the air, curling into gentle vapor. Fringe stories hint at subtle psychoactive ingredients added to some brews, producing mild euphoria or creative inspiration. Scholars still debate the frequency and intent of these indulgences, but the imagery is vivid. A king reclining, inhaling deeply, letting fragrance and warmth dissolve the tensions of courtly intrigue. The faint clink of porcelain and the soft hiss of steam underscore the intimacy of this private ritual. In the palace gardens, moonlight glints off meticulously maintained fountains, hedges, and rows of aromatic plants. Louis reportedly enjoyed strolling through these fragrant paths with trusted companions, occasionally sampling teas or inhaling crushed leaves to enhance relaxation or amusement. Fringe accounts suggest these walks were moments of subtle experimentation, observing the effects of scents on mood, conversation, or creativity. Historians still argue about the authenticity and frequency of these practices, but the image is compelling. Rustling leaves, soft laughter, and the delicate, heady perfume of herbs and flowers mingling with the cool night air. Inside the royal chambers, jars of dried herbs, powders, and tinctures line shelves in meticulous order. Louis XV reportedly tested combinations for relaxation, mild stimulation, or subtle euphoria. Fringe reports hint that some concoctions were mildly intoxicating, while others were purely aromatic, designed to soothe nerves or inspire reflection. Scholars continue to debate the veracity of these stories, yet the sensory tableau is clear. Warm steam rising from delicate cups, scent mingling with candle wax, and a monarch immersed in the quiet pleasure of aromatic experimentation. You drift past long galleries adorned with tapestries, portraits, and gilded mirrors, the faint aroma of herbs lingering like a whisper. Louis XV's indulgences reportedly combined sensory delight with playful experimentation, sometimes observed by a select circle of courtiers. Fringe anecdotes describe soft laughter, gentle amusement, or reflection induced by aromatic teas or herbal mixtures. Historians still debate the frequency and accuracy, but the scene is vivid. Candlelight flickering on polished surfaces, fragrant steam curling toward the ceiling, and subtle, whispered reactions echoing through the quiet halls. In a secluded alcove, the king might recline with a cup of steaming herbal tea, inhaling the complex aromas and allowing a rare moment of calm. Fringe accounts suggest occasional mild intoxicants or psychoactive herbs, though scholars remain skeptical. You can feel the quiet indulgence, the warmth of candlelight, and the soft scent of crushed herbs creating a private cocoon, contrasting with the grandeur and ceremony of Versailles. Finally, as you step onto a balcony overlooking the moonlit gardens, fountains sparkling in silver, the night air carries the mingled fragrance of crushed herbs, distant flowers, and the faint scent of spiced wine. Louis XV reportedly inhaled deeply, savoring subtle sensory pleasure, reflection, and occasional playful indulgence. Fringe tales hint at discreet private gatherings with trusted confidants, while historians still debate the details. You sense the layered intimacy, quiet delight, and delicate pleasure of a monarch who mastered both grand spectacle and private sensory indulgence under the soft, glowing moonlight. You wander through the sprawling, candlelit corridors of Catherine the Great's winter palace, the empress whose reputation for intellect and power is matched only by whispered tales of indulgence. The faint aroma of crushed herbs, sweet blossoms, and spiced tea drifts through the halls, hinting at private rituals of relaxation and experimentation. Catherine reportedly had a fondness for herbal infusions and exotic concoctions, sometimes combining imported ingredients with native herbs to achieve subtle effects on mood and reflection. Fringe accounts suggest occasional mild intoxication or euphoric experiences, though historians still argue whether these tales are exaggerated or factual. You step carefully into her imagined world, inhaling the mingled fragrances as the palace settles into quiet grandeur. Imagine Catherine seated in a lavishly appointed chamber, a delicate cup of steaming tea in hand, candlelight flickering across polished wood and gilded surfaces. Herbs like chamomile, mint, and imported flowers release their aroma, curling gently into the air. Fringe stories hint at occasional additions of subtle psychoactive ingredients designed to calm nerves or inspire creative thought. Scholars still debate whether these indulgences were routine or rare experiments, but the image is compelling. An empress, intelligent and commanding, savoring the delicate fragrance and warmth of her private ritual. In the palace gardens, moonlight illuminates neat rows of fragrant herbs, fountains, and flowering shrubs. Catherine reportedly enjoyed solitary strolls or walks with trusted companions, occasionally sipping mild herbal teas or inhaling the scent of crushed leaves. Fringe anecdotes suggest these excursions sometimes included subtle experimentation, observing the effects of aroma and flavor on mood, thought, or conversation. Historians still argue about the authenticity and frequency of such practices, but the mental image is vivid. Soft rustle of leaves, distant laughter, and the mingling scent of crushed herbs and blossoms in the cool night air. Inside her chambers, shelves are lined with jars of dried herbs, tinctures, and powders. Catherine reportedly tested combinations designed to calm, stimulate, or induce subtle euphoria. Fringe accounts hint that some blends produced mild creative inspiration or gentle delight, though scholars still debate the veracity of these anecdotes. You can imagine the steam rising from a delicate cup, the aroma mingling with the soft warmth of candlelight and polished wood, and the quiet pleasure of an empress fully absorbed in her private indulgence. Walking past portraits of Russian ancestors in ceremonial regalia, the faint scent of herbs lingers like a ghostly companion. Catherine's indulgences reportedly combined sensory pleasure with subtle experimentation, allowing moments of reflection or gentle amusement amid her immense responsibilities. Fringe stories hint at discreet tasting sessions with trusted advisors or confidants, observing the subtle effects of aromatic blends. Historians still argue about the frequency and purpose of these practices, but the imagery is clear. Candlelight flickering on polished surfaces, warm steam rising, and quiet murmurs of delight or reflection in the background. In a small, secluded alcove, Catherine might recline with her cup of steaming tea, inhaling deeply as the fragrant vapor curls upward. Fringe tales suggest occasional mild psychoactive additions, though scholars remain skeptical. You can sense the intimacy, the warmth of candlelight, and the soft mingling of aromas creating a private world of indulgence and reflection. Finally, as you step onto a balcony overlooking moonlit gardens, fountains sparkling softly, the night air carries the mingled scents of crushed herbs, distant flowers, and faint traces of spiced tea. Catherine reportedly inhaled deeply, savoring moments of quiet reflection, private indulgence, and subtle sensory pleasure. Fringe anecdotes hint at discreet gatherings with trusted companions, while historians continue to debate specifics. You feel the layered intimacy and quiet delight, imagining an empress whose formidable public presence coexists with private rituals of fragrance, taste, and gentle sensory indulgence. You move through the grand torchlit halls of Gustav III of Sweden, the flamboyant king whose love for theater, art, and sensory indulgence is as famous as his political ambitions. The air carries a delicate mixture of crushed herbs, perfumed oils, and faint tobacco smoke, hinting at private rituals of relaxation and experimentation. Gustav reportedly enjoyed herbal infusions, fragrant oils, and mild intoxicants, blending intellectual stimulation with sensory pleasure. Fringe accounts suggest he sometimes experimented with exotic herbs or psychoactive ingredients to heighten creativity, though historians still argue whether these practices were common or occasional. Tonight, you drift into the imagined aromatic world of a monarch who delighted in the interplay of art, intellect, and indulgence. Picture Gustav seated in a private chamber, candlelight dancing across gilded mirrors and polished wood, a delicate porcelain cup of herbal tea warming his hands. Herbs like lavender, mint, and imported flowers release their gentle fragrance, curling into the air. Fringe stories hint at occasional additions of mildly psychoactive substances designed to relax or inspire creative thought. Scholars still debate the extent and regularity of these indulgences, but the image is compelling. A king, elegant and contemplative, inhaling deeply, letting the aroma and warmth dissolve the pressures of courtly intrigue and governance. In the palace gardens, moonlight glints off fountains, trimmed hedges, and rows of aromatic plants. Gustav reportedly enjoyed evening strolls, inhaling the scent of crushed herbs and sipping mild infusions. Fringe anecdotes suggest these walks sometimes became subtle experiments, observing the effects of aroma, taste, or mild intoxication on mood, conversation, or artistic inspiration. Historians still argue about the accuracy and purpose of these accounts, yet you can almost hear the rustle of leaves, the soft splash of water, and the gentle laughter or thoughtful murmurs of trusted companions sharing these private moments. Inside his chambers, jars of dried herbs, tinctures, and powders line shelves meticulously. Gustav reportedly experimented with combinations designed to calm, stimulate, or enhance creative insight. Fringe reports hint at infusions that could induce mild euphoria, reflection, or aesthetic inspiration, though scholars continue to debate their veracity. You can imagine the faint hiss of steam rising from delicate cups, the mingling scent of herbs with wax and polished wood, and the quiet pleasure of a monarch absorbed in aromatic experimentation. Walking past portraits of Swedish ancestors and theatrical productions, the faint scent of herbs lingers like an invisible thread. Gustav's indulgences reportedly combined sensory pleasure with artistic experimentation, allowing moments of reflection, amusement, or inspiration amid the pressures of rule. Fringe stories hint at discreet tasting sessions with a select few, observing subtle effects on mood or conversation. Historians still argue about their frequency and authenticity, but the imagery is vivid. Candlelight flickering on polished surfaces, fragrant steam curling toward the ceiling, and the quiet interplay of curiosity, intellect, and private delight. In a secluded alcove, Gustav might recline with his cup of steaming tea, inhaling the aromatic vapor and letting the subtle effects wash over him. Fringe accounts suggest occasional mild intoxicants or exotic herbs, though scholars remain skeptical. You sense the intimacy, warmth, and quiet pleasure of a monarch blending sensory indulgence with intellectual curiosity. Finally, As you step onto a balcony overlooking moonlit gardens and softly lit fountains, the night air carries the mingled scents of crushed herbs, flowers, and faint tobacco smoke. Gustav reportedly inhaled deeply, savoring moments of private delight, reflection, and subtle sensory stimulation. Fringe anecdotes hint at discrete shared experiences, while historians continue to debate specifics. You feel the layered intimacy and quiet delight, imagining a king whose love of art, intellect, and aroma intertwined seamlessly with his private indulgences under the calm glow of moonlight. You glide silently through the ornate, torchlit corridors of Leopold I of Austria, the Holy Roman Emperor, whose public image of rigid piety contrasts with whispers of private indulgences. The faint scent of crushed herbs, spiced wine, and floral oils clings to the air, suggesting hidden rituals of relaxation and mild experimentation. Leopold reportedly enjoyed herbal infusions and aromatic baths, sometimes blending medicinal and recreational elements to soothe his mind and body. Fringe accounts hint at subtle psychoactive additions, though historians still debate whether these practices were occasional experiments or regular indulgences. You step into his imagined sensory world, inhaling the mingled fragrances as the palace settles into nocturnal calm. Picture Leopold seated in a private chamber, candlelight reflecting off polished wood, gilded frames, and a delicate cup of steaming herbal tea in hand. Herbs like rosemary, lavender, and chamomile release their fragrance into the warm air, curling in gentle spirals. Fringe stories suggest that he occasionally experimented with mild intoxicants or psychoactive herbs to enhance relaxation, focus, or creativity. Scholars still argue about the frequency and intent of these indulgences, but the image is compelling. A ruler absorbed quietly inhaling aroma and warmth, while the weight of empire temporarily fades. In the palace gardens, moonlight catches fountains, hedges, and aromatic plants, releasing faint fragrances that mingle with night air. Leopold reportedly enjoyed solitary walks or brief strolls with trusted companions, sipping herbal infusions and inhaling crushed leaves. Fringe anecdotes suggest these walks sometimes included subtle experiments to observe effects on mood, clarity, or conversation. Historians still argue about the accuracy and significance of these practices, yet the sensory image is vivid. Rustling leaves, soft water splashes, and quiet murmurs echoing through the cool, scented night. Inside his chambers, shelves lined with jars of dried herbs, tinctures, and powders testify to careful experimentation. Leopold reportedly measured and combined these ingredients to induce relaxation, mild stimulation, or gentle euphoria. Fringe reports hint that some infusions were mildly intoxicating or creatively inspiring, though scholars remain cautious about accepting these claims. You can almost hear the faint hiss of steam from cups, the delicate fragrance mingling with candle wax, and the quiet pleasure of an emperor absorbed in private indulgence. Walking past portraits of ancestors and ceremonial regalia, the subtle scent of herbs lingers, weaving through the room like a private companion. Leopold's indulgences reportedly blended sensory pleasure with mild experimentation, offering moments of reflection or gentle amusement amid strict duties. Fringe stories hint at occasional private sessions with confidants, observing subtle effects on mood or thought. Historians still argue about authenticity, but the imagery is strong. Flickering candlelight, fragrant steam rising, and the soft murmur of curiosity and quiet delight. In a secluded alcove, Leopold might recline with his cup of herbal infusion, inhaling deeply as the fragrant vapor curls upward. Fringe accounts suggest occasional minor psychoactive herbs, though scholars remain skeptical. You can sense the intimacy, warmth, and contemplative pleasure of a monarch balancing private indulgence with public responsibility. Finally, as you step onto a balcony overlooking moonlit gardens and softly lit courtyards, the night air carries the mingled scents of crushed herbs, flowers, and distant water features. Leopold reportedly inhaled deeply, savoring moments of quiet reflection, subtle indulgence, and sensory pleasure. Fringe anecdotes hint at discreet, private experiences with trusted companions, while historians continue to debate specifics. You feel the layered intimacy, quiet delight, and subtle sensory richness of a ruler whose private indulgences brought softness and reflection to a life of rigid duty. You wander quietly through the candlelit halls of Charles VI of the Holy Roman Empire, the emperor whose devotion to duty and lineage contrasts with whispered tales of private indulgences. The faint scent of crushed herbs, spiced teas, and subtle floral oils drift through the corridors, hinting at personal rituals of calm and mild experimentation. Charles reportedly enjoyed herbal infusions and aromatic concoctions, blending relaxation with gentle stimulation. Fringe accounts suggest that he occasionally experimented with mildly psychoactive herbs or exotic blends, though historians still debate whether these were habitual practices or rare diversions. You step softly into his imagined sensory world, inhaling the mingled fragrances of a palace settling into nocturnal calm. Picture Charles seated in a private chamber, candlelight reflecting off polished wood, gilded frames, and delicate porcelain cups of steaming herbal tea at his side. Herbs like chamomile, lavender, and mint curl their fragrance into the air. Fringe stories hint at occasional additions of subtle psychoactive ingredients intended to ease tension or enhance reflective thought. Scholars still debate the frequency and intent of these indulgences, but the image is clear: a ruler quietly inhaling aroma and warmth, allowing the pressures of empire to momentarily fade in scented golden light. In the palace gardens, moonlight glints on fountains, trimmed hedges, and beds of aromatic plants. Charles reportedly enjoyed brief walks alone or with trusted confidants, sipping mild herbal infusions while inhaling crushed leaves. Fringe anecdotes suggest these strolls sometimes involved subtle experimentation, observing effects on mood, clarity, or conversation. Historians still argue about the veracity and significance of these practices, yet the mental image is vivid. Rustling leaves, soft water splashes, and the delicate, intoxicating fragrance of herbs mingling with the night air. Inside his private chambers, jars of dried herbs, tinctures, and powders line shelves meticulously. Charles reportedly experimented with combinations designed to relax, stimulate, or gently elevate mood. Fringe reports hint that some infusions may have produced mild euphoria or creative inspiration, though scholars remain cautious about the accuracy of these accounts. You can almost hear the faint hiss of steam from a cup, the aroma curling with candle wax, and the quiet pleasure of a monarch absorbed in aromatic indulgence. Walking past portraits of ancestors, ceremonial regalia, and battle scenes, the faint scent of herbs lingers like a soft companion. Charles's indulgences reportedly combine sensory pleasure with private experimentation, offering moments of reflection or amusement amid immense responsibilities. Fringe stories hint at occasional private sessions with select confidants, observing subtle effects of herbal blends. Historians still argue about the authenticity of these anecdotes, but the imagery is clear: flickering candlelight, rising fragrant steam, and gentle murmurs of quiet delight. In a secluded alcove, Charles might recline with a cup of steaming herbal infusion, inhaling deeply as fragrant vapor curls upward. Fringe accounts hint at mild psychoactive ingredients, though scholars remain skeptical. You sense the intimacy, warmth, and gentle pleasure of a monarch balancing private sensory indulgence with public duty. Finally, as you step onto a balcony overlooking moonlit gardens, fountains softly illuminated, the night air carries the mingled scents of crushed herbs, flowers, and distant water. Charles reportedly inhaled deeply, savoring moments of private reflection, subtle pleasure, and quiet indulgence. Fringe tales hint at discrete shared experiences. While historians continue to debate details, you feel the layered intimacy and calm delight of a ruler whose private rituals brought warmth, scent, and sensory richness to a life of rigorous expectation. You step carefully into the candlelit halls of Maria Carolina of Austria, the politically astute queen whose influence over Naples blended ambition, intellect, and occasional private indulgence. The faint aroma of crushed herbs, perfumed oils, and sweetened teas lingers in the air, hinting at her hidden sensory rituals. Maria Carolina reportedly enjoyed herbal infusions and carefully prepared aromatic baths, blending medicinal benefits with mild recreational pleasure. Fringe accounts suggest that some of these concoctions were subtly psychoactive, though historians still debate whether they were part of routine indulgence or rare experimentation. Tonight, you let yourself wander into the imagined sensory world of a queen who balanced duty, power, and quiet personal pleasure. Picture Maria Carolina seated in a softly lit chamber, candlelight reflecting on polished wood, gilt mirrors, and delicate porcelain cups of steaming herbal tea in hand. Herbs like lavender, mint, and chamomile curl fragrance into the warm air, creating an intimate, calming atmosphere. Fringe tales hint at occasional minor psychoactive ingredients intended to soothe nerves or stimulate reflection. Scholars still debate the extent and purpose of these indulgences, but the image is vivid. A queen quietly savoring aroma and warmth, her mind briefly unburdened by the relentless demands of statecraft. In the palace gardens, moonlight glints on fountains, flower beds, and aromatic herbs. Maria Carolina reportedly enjoyed solitary strolls or walks with trusted confidants, sipping mild herbal teas while inhaling crushed leaves and flowers. Fringe anecdotes suggest these moments sometimes involved subtle experimentation, observing the effects of aroma, flavor, or gentle stimulation on mood, conversation, or thought. Historians still argue about the frequency and veracity of these practices, yet the sensory image is vivid. Rustling leaves, the soft splash of water, and gentle murmurs echoing through fragrant night air. Inside her chambers, shelves lined with jars of dried herbs, powders, and tinctures suggest careful experimentation. Maria Carolina reportedly combined ingredients to produce relaxation, mild stimulation, or subtle euphoria. Fringe reports hint that some infusions were mildly intoxicating or creatively inspiring, though scholars remain skeptical of their accuracy. You can almost hear the soft hiss of steam rising from a cup, the fragrance mingling with candle wax, and the quiet pleasure of a monarch absorbed in aromatic indulgence. Walking past portraits of ancestors, ceremonial regalia, and scenes of diplomacy, the faint scent of herbs lingers like an invisible companion. Maria Carolina's indulgences reportedly blended sensory pleasure with intellectual reflection, offering moments of quiet amusement or contemplation amid her responsibilities. Fringe stories hint at discreet sessions with trusted advisors, observing subtle effects of aromatic blends. Historians still debate the accuracy of these anecdotes, but the imagery remains vivid. Flickering candlelight, fragrant steam rising, and soft, thoughtful murmurs in a private corner of the palace. In a secluded alcove, Maria Carolina might recline with her cup of tea, inhaling fragrant vapor as she contemplates letters, diplomacy, or personal reflection. Fringe accounts suggest occasional minor psychoactive ingredients, though scholars remain cautious. You sense intimacy, warmth, and the quiet pleasure of a queen balancing private indulgence with immense public duty. Finally, stepping onto a balcony overlooking moonlit gardens and softly illuminated fountains, the night air carries the mingled scents of crushed herbs, blossoms, and distant water. Maria Carolina reportedly inhaled deeply, savoring moments of quiet reflection, private delight, and subtle sensory pleasure. Fringe anecdotes hint at small, discreet gatherings with trusted confidants, while historians continue to debate specifics. You feel the layered intimacy, gentle, calm, and delicate pleasure of a queen whose private rituals brought fragrance, warmth, and reflection into the midst of power and responsibility. You step quietly into the shadowed corridors of Frederick William I of Prussia, the Soldier King, whose public reputation for strict discipline contrasts sharply with whispered tales of private indulgence. The faint scent of crushed herbs, spiced teas, and subtle floral oils clings to the stone walls, hinting at hidden rituals of sensory pleasure and experimentation. Frederick reportedly enjoyed herbal infusions and aromatic baths, sometimes blending medicinal, relaxing, and mildly euphoric ingredients. Fringe accounts suggest that he occasionally incorporated experimental blends, though historians still argue whether these were habitual indulgences or rare diversions. You allow yourself to imagine the sensory richness of a ruler so known for rigidity finding secret aromatic escapes. Picture Frederick William seated in a private chamber, candlelight flickering across polished wood and brass fittings, a delicate cup of steaming herbal tea cradled in his hands. Herbs such as chamomile, rosemary, and mint curl their fragrance into the warm air, forming a calming atmosphere. Fringe tales hint that some concoctions contain subtle psychoactive elements, producing gentle euphoria or heightened focus. Scholars still debate the extent and purpose of these indulgences, but the imagery is compelling. A stern king quietly inhaling aroma and warmth, letting the pressures of military and administrative duty soften momentarily. In the palace gardens, moonlight illuminates rows of aromatic herbs, fountains, and sculpted hedges. Frederick reportedly enjoyed solitary walks or brief excursions with trusted aides, inhaling crushed leaves and sipping herbal infusions. Fringe anecdotes suggest that these strolls sometimes served as experimental tests, observing how aromas or mild stimulants influenced mood, concentration, or conversation. Historians still argue about the frequency and accuracy of these practices, yet the mental image is vivid. The soft rustle of leaves, distant water splashes, and the faint fragrance of herbs blending with crisp night air. Inside the chambers, shelves of dried herbs, tinctures, and powders reveal meticulous care. Frederick reportedly experimented with combinations to produce relaxation, subtle stimulation, or mild euphoria. Fringe reports hint that some infusions may have been slightly intoxicating or mentally stimulating, though scholars remain cautious. You can almost hear the faint hiss of steam from a cup, the mingling aroma of herbs and wax, and the quiet pleasure of a king absorbed in private indulgence. Walking past portraits of ancestors and military achievements, the faint scent of herbs lingers, forming a quiet companion. Frederick William's indulgences reportedly combined sensory pleasure with private experimentation, offering moments of reflection or gentle amusement amid strict duties. Fringe tales hint at occasional tasting sessions with trusted aides, quietly noting subtle effects on mood or cognition. Historians still debate accuracy, but the imagery is strong: flickering candlelight, fragrant steam rising, and the quiet interplay of curiosity, discipline, and private pleasure. In a secluded alcove, the king might recline with his cup of steaming infusion, inhaling fragrant vapor as he reflects on strategy, governance, or personal thought. Fringe accounts hint at minor psychoactive additions, though scholars remain skeptical. You sense intimacy, warmth, and subtle delight, a monarch balancing rigid public authority with secret aromatic indulgence. Finally, as you step onto a balcony overlooking moonlit gardens and softly illuminated courtyards, the night air carries the mingled scents of crushed herbs, blossoms, and distant fountains. Frederick reportedly inhaled deeply, savoring moments of quiet reflection, private pleasure, and sensory richness. Fringe anecdotes hint at small, discreet gatherings with trusted confidants, while historians continue to debate specifics. You feel the layered intimacy, quiet delight, and understated pleasure of a ruler whose private rituals soften the rigidity of life under strict authority. You drift silently into the candlelit halls of Charles III of Spain, the reformist king whose love of order and progress masks the whispers of private indulgences. The faint scent of crushed herbs, spiced teas, and floral oils drifts through the corridors, suggesting moments of quiet reflection and sensory pleasure. Charles reportedly enjoyed herbal infusions, aromatic baths, and mild recreational blends, blending relaxation with subtle experimentation. Fringe accounts hint that he sometimes incorporated mildly psychoactive ingredients to ease tension or inspire thought, though historians still debate whether these were occasional diversions or routine practices. You allow yourself to step into his imagined aromatic world, inhaling the mingled scents as the palace settles into nocturnal calm. Picture Charles seated in a private chamber, candlelight flickering across polished wood, gilt mirrors, and delicate porcelain cups of steaming herbal tea at his side. Herbs such as lavender, chamomile, and mint release their gentle fragrance into the air. Fringe stories hint at occasional minor psychoactive ingredients added to infusions to promote calm or inspiration. Scholars still debate the frequency and intent of these indulgences, but the image is vivid: a monarch quietly savoring aroma and warmth, letting the pressures of government melt momentarily into fragrant steam. In the palace gardens, moonlight glints over fountains, flower beds, and rows of aromatic herbs. Charles reportedly enjoyed quiet strolls, inhaling crushed leaves and sipping mild herbal infusions. Fringe anecdotes suggest that these walks sometimes involve subtle experimentation, observing the effects of aromas, flavors, or mild stimulants on mood, reflection, or conversation. Historians still argue about the authenticity and frequency of such practices, yet the sensory imagery is compelling. Soft rustle of leaves, distant water splashes, and gentle laughter or murmurs shared with trusted companions. Inside his private chambers, shelves lined with jars of dried herbs, tinctures, and powders reveal careful experimentation. Charles reportedly combined ingredients to relax, mildly stimulate, or gently elevate mood. Fringe reports hint at some infusions being mildly euphoric or creatively inspiring, though scholars remain cautious about their accuracy. You can almost hear the faint hiss of steam rising from delicate cups, the mingling scent of herbs and candle wax, and the quiet pleasure of a monarch absorbed in aromatic indulgence. Walking past portraits of ancestors, ceremonial regalia, and depictions of political achievements, the faint scent of herbs lingers like a soft companion. Charles's indulgences reportedly blended sensory pleasure with subtle experimentation, offering moments of reflection, amusement, or gentle stimulation amid governance. Fringe stories hint at discreet tasting sessions with trusted confidants, observing subtle effects on mood or thought. Historians still debate the accuracy of these anecdotes, but the scene is vivid: flickering candlelight, rising fragrant steam, and soft, whispered enjoyment in a private corner of the palace. In a secluded alcove, Charles might recline with his cup of steaming herbal infusion, inhaling deeply as fragrant vapor curls upward. Fringe accounts hint at minor psychoactive ingredients, though scholars remain skeptical. You can sense intimacy, warmth, and quiet delight, a monarch balancing private sensory indulgence with public responsibility. Finally, stepping onto a balcony overlooking moonlit gardens and softly lit courtyards, the night air carries the mingled scents of crushed herbs, flowers, and distant fountains. Charles reportedly inhaled deeply, savoring moments of quiet reflection, private pleasure, and subtle sensory stimulation. Fringe anecdotes hint at discreet gatherings with trusted confidants, while historians continue to debate details. You feel the layered intimacy, gentle, calm, and understated pleasure of a king whose private rituals brought fragrance, warmth, and quiet reflection into the life of rule. You glide through the golden, torchlit halls of George IV of the United Kingdom, the Regency monarch whose public persona of extravagance masks a private life steeped in indulgence and experimentation. The air carries a subtle mixture of crushed herbs, spiced wines, and faint floral scents, hinting at hidden rituals of relaxation and pleasure. George reportedly enjoyed herbal infusions, scented baths, and mild stimulants, combining leisure and subtle experimentation. Fringe accounts suggest he sometimes incorporated exotic herbs or delicate psychoactive blends to enhance mood or creativity, though historians still debate whether these practices were habitual or occasional diversions. You step carefully into his imagined sensory world, inhaling the mingled fragrances as the palace hums quietly in the night. Picture George seated in a lavish chamber, candlelight flickering against gilded mirrors and polished wood, a delicate cup of steaming herbal tea in hand. Herbs like lavender, mint, and imported flowers release their aroma into the warm air, curling upward in gentle spirals. Fringe tales hint at occasional additions of subtle psychoactive ingredients, to ease tension or inspire reflection. Scholars still debate the frequency and intent of these indulgences, but the image is vivid. A king reclining, inhaling deeply, letting the pressures of ceremonial duty dissolve into fragrant warmth. The faint clink of porcelain and hiss of steam underscores the intimacy of this private ritual. In the palace gardens, moonlight illuminates fountains, trimmed hedges, and rows of aromatic plants. George reportedly enjoyed solitary strolls or brief walks with trusted companions, sipping mild herbal teas while inhaling the scent of crushed leaves. Fringe anecdotes suggest these excursions sometimes served as subtle experiments, noting the effects of aroma or mild stimulants on mood, conversation, or thought. Historians still argue about the authenticity and significance of these practices, yet the sensory image is vivid. Soft rustle of leaves, distant splashes from fountains, and the delicate fragrance of herbs blending with the cool night air. Inside his chambers, jars of dried herbs, powders, and tinctures line shelves with meticulous care. George reportedly experimented with combinations designed to relax, stimulate, or gently elevate mood. Fringe reports hint that some infusions were mildly intoxicating or creatively inspiring, though scholars remain cautious. You can almost hear the faint hiss of steam from a cup, the mingling aroma of herbs with candle wax, and the quiet pleasure of a monarch absorbed in aromatic indulgence. Walking past portraits, ceremonial regalia, and tapestries, the faint scent of herbs lingers like a subtle companion. George's indulgences reportedly blended sensory pleasure with mild experimentation, offering moments of reflection, amusement, or gentle stimulation amid the pressures of monarchy. Fringe stories hint at discreet tasting sessions with trusted confidants, observing subtle effects on mood or thought. Historians still debate the accuracy of these anecdotes, but the imagery remains vivid. Flickering candlelight, fragrant steam curling upward, and soft, whispered enjoyment in a private corner of the palace. In a secluded alcove, George might recline with his cup of steaming herbal infusion, inhaling deeply as fragrant vapor curls into the air. Fringe accounts hint at occasional mild psychoactive additions, though scholars remain skeptical. You sense the intimacy, warmth, and quiet pleasure of a monarch balancing public display with private indulgence. Finally, as you step onto a balcony overlooking moonlit gardens and softly lit fountains, the night air carries the mingled scents of crushed herbs, blossoms, and distant water. George reportedly inhaled deeply, savoring moments of private reflection, subtle pleasure, and sensory indulgence. Fringe anecdotes hint at discreet gatherings with trusted companions, while historians continue to debate specifics. You feel the layered intimacy, gentle, calm, and understated delight of a king whose private rituals brought fragrance, warmth, and quiet pleasure to life under public scrutiny. You move quietly through the shadowed corridors of Peter the Great's winter palace, the reformist Tsar whose towering public persona overshadows hints of private indulgence. The faint scent of crushed herbs, spiced teas, and subtle floral oils drifts through the air, suggesting intimate rituals of relaxation and mild experimentation. Peter reportedly enjoyed herbal infusions, aromatic baths, and occasional mild stimulants, combining personal leisure with subtle experimentation. Fringe accounts hint at occasional use of psychoactive or exotic herbs to inspire reflection or amusement, though historians still debate whether these practices were habitual or occasional diversions. You step into his imagined aromatic world, inhaling the mingled fragrances as the palace hums softly in the night. Picture Peter seated in a private chamber, candlelight flickering on polished wood, brass fittings, and delicate cups of steaming herbal tea. Herbs like mint, chamomile, and imported flowers release their fragrance into the warm air. Fringe tales hint that he occasionally added minor psychoactive elements to his infusions, producing gentle euphoria or heightened focus. Scholars still debate the regularity and purpose of these indulgences, but the image is vivid. A czar quietly inhaling warmth and aroma, letting the burdens of reform and empire soften under the glow of candlelight. In the palace gardens, moonlight glints over fountains, trimmed hedges, and beds of aromatic herbs. Peter reportedly enjoyed solitary strolls or brief walks with trusted aides, sipping mild herbal teas and inhaling crushed leaves and blossoms. Fringe anecdotes suggest these walks occasionally served as subtle experiments, observing the effects of aroma or mild stimulants on mood, reflection, or conversation. Historians still argue about the accuracy and significance of these accounts, yet the sensory imagery is vivid: rustling leaves, soft water splashes, and the delicate fragrance of herbs mingling with the crisp night air. Inside his chambers, shelves lined with jars of dried herbs, powders, and tinctures suggest careful experimentation. Peter reportedly combined ingredients to relax, stimulate, or induce subtle euphoria. Fringe reports hint that some infusions were mildly intoxicating or creatively inspiring, though scholars remain cautious. You can almost hear the faint hiss of steam from a cup, the mingling aroma of herbs and candle wax, and the quiet pleasure of a monarch absorbed in aromatic indulgence. Walking past portraits of ancestors, naval achievements, and battle scenes, the faint scent of herbs lingers like a soft companion. Peter's indulgences reportedly combined sensory pleasure with private experimentation, offering moments of reflection or gentle amusement amid rigorous responsibilities. Fringe stories hint at discreet tasting sessions with trusted aides, quietly noting subtle effects on mood or cognition. Historians still debate accuracy, but the imagery is compelling. Flickering candlelight, fragrant steam rising, and soft, thoughtful murmurs in a private corner of the palace. In a secluded alcove, Peter might recline with his cup of steaming herbal infusion, inhaling fragrant vapor as he contemplates statecraft, naval plans, or personal reflection. Fringe accounts hint at minor psychoactive additions, though scholars remain skeptical. You sense intimacy, warmth, and quiet delight, a Tsar balancing monumental ambition with private sensory indulgence. Finally, as you step onto a balcony overlooking moonlit gardens, fountains softly illuminated, the night air carries the mingled scents of crushed herbs, flowers, and distant water. Peter reportedly inhaled deeply, savoring moments of quiet reflection, subtle pleasure, and sensory richness. Fringe anecdotes hint at discrete shared experiences, while historians continue to debate specifics. You feel the layered intimacy and understated delight of a ruler whose private rituals brought fragrance, warmth, and quiet pleasure into the life of empire and reform. You wander through the gilded, torchlit corridors of Louis XVI of France, the last king before the revolutionary tide swept the monarchy away. The faint scent of crushed herbs, spiced teas, and floral infusions drifts through the air, hinting at private indulgences carefully concealed beneath royal protocol. Louis reportedly enjoyed herbal infusions, aromatic baths, and occasional mild stimulants, blending relaxation with subtle experimentation. Fringe accounts suggest that he sometimes incorporated minor psychoactive herbs or exotic blends to ease stress or inspire reflection, though historians still debate whether these were rare diversions or a habitual ritual. Tonight, you slip quietly into his imagined sensory world, inhaling the mingled fragrances as Versailles settles into the deep calm of night. Picture Louis seated in a private chamber, candlelight flickering across polished wood, gilt mirrors, and delicate porcelain cups of steaming herbal tea in hand. Herbs like lavender, chamomile, and mint curl their fragrance into the air, forming a soothing cocoon. Fringe tales hint at occasional additions of subtle psychoactive ingredients, intended to ease nerves or provoke gentle contemplation. Scholars still debate the frequency and purpose of these indulgences, but the imagery is clear. A monarch quietly inhaling aroma and warmth, allowing the burdens of governance and looming uncertainty to soften under soft golden light. In the palace gardens, moonlight illuminates fountains, flower beds, and aromatic herbs, releasing faint but intoxicating fragrances. Louis reportedly enjoyed solitary strolls or walks with a trusted companion, sipping herbal teas and inhaling crushed leaves. Fringe anecdotes suggest these excursions sometimes involved subtle experimentation, observing the effects of aroma, flavor, or mild stimulants on mood, thought, or conversation. Historians still argue about the authenticity and significance of these practices, yet the sensory image is vivid. Rustling leaves, faint water splashes, and gentle murmurs blending with night air and fragrant blooms. Inside his private chambers, shelves lined with jars of dried herbs, powders, and tinctures indicate careful preparation. Lewis reportedly experimented with combinations designed to calm, stimulate, or gently elevate mood. Fringe reports hint that some infusions could produce mild euphoria or creative reflection, though scholars remain cautious. You can almost hear the soft hiss of steam rising from a delicate cup, the mingling aroma with candle wax, and the quiet pleasure of a king absorbed in aromatic indulgence. Walking past portraits of ancestors, ceremonial regalia, and tapestries, the faint scent of herbs lingers like an invisible companion. Louis' indulgences reportedly combined sensory pleasure with mild experimentation, offering moments of reflection, amusement, or subtle mental stimulation amid royal pressures. Fringe stories hint at discreet tasting sessions with trusted aides, noting subtle effects on mood or thought. Historians still debate their accuracy, but the scene remains vivid. Flickering candlelight, rising fragrant steam, and soft, whispered enjoyment in a secluded corner of Versailles. In a secluded alcove, Louis might recline with his cup of steaming herbal infusion, inhaling fragrant vapor as he contemplates state affairs, personal reflection, or private thoughts. Fringe accounts suggest occasional mild psychoactive herbs, though scholars remain skeptical. You sense intimacy, warmth, and quiet delight, a monarch balancing immense responsibility with private sensory indulgence. Finally, as you step onto a balcony overlooking moonlit gardens and softly illuminated fountains, the night air carries the mingled scents of crushed herbs, blossoms, and distant water. Lewis reportedly inhaled deeply, savoring moments of quiet reflection, private pleasure, and subtle sensory richness. Fringe anecdotes hint at small, discreet gatherings with trusted confidants, while historians continue to debate details. You feel the layered intimacy and understated pleasure of a ruler whose private rituals brought fragrance, warmth, and quiet delight into a world of grandeur, ceremony, and impending change. You drift silently through the ornate candlelit halls of Ferdinand VII of Spain, the king whose reign was marked by political turbulence and personal indulgence. The faint scent of crushed herbs, spiced teas, and delicate floral oils lingers in the air, hinting at secret rituals of relaxation and sensory pleasure. Ferdinand reportedly enjoyed herbal infusions, aromatic baths, and mild stimulants, blending leisure with subtle experimentation. Fringe accounts suggest that he occasionally incorporated exotic or mildly psychoactive herbs to calm nerves or inspire thought, though historians still debate whether these were routine practices or occasional indulgences. You allow yourself to step into his imagined aromatic world, inhaling the mingled fragrances as the palace quiets under the night sky. Picture Ferdinand seated in a private chamber, candlelight reflecting on polished wood, gilt mirrors, and delicate porcelain cups of steaming herbal tea. Herbs such as chamomile, lavender, and mint curl fragrance into the warm air. Fringe stories hint that he occasionally added subtle psychoactive elements, producing gentle euphoria or reflective calm. Scholars still debate the extent and purpose of these indulgences, but the image is vivid. A king quietly inhaling warmth and aroma, letting political tension and royal expectation melt into fragrant comfort. In the palace gardens, moonlight glints over fountains, trimmed hedges, and beds of aromatic herbs. Ferdinand reportedly enjoyed solitary walks or brief strolls with trusted confidants, sipping mild herbal teas while inhaling crushed leaves and blossoms. Fringe anecdotes suggest these walks occasionally involved subtle experiments, observing the effects of aroma, flavor, or mild stimulants on mood, reflection, or conversation. Historians still argue about the accuracy and significance of these practices, yet the sensory image is vivid. Rustling leaves, distant water splashes, and gentle murmurs mingling with fragrant night air. Inside his chambers, shelves of dried herbs, powders, and tinctures reveal meticulous preparation. Ferdinand reportedly experimented with combinations designed to relax, mildly stimulate, or gently elevate mood. Fringe reports hint that some infusions were mildly euphoric or creatively inspiring, though scholars remain cautious. You can almost hear the soft hiss of steam from a cup, the mingling aroma of herbs and candle wax, and the quiet pleasure of a monarch absorbed in private indulgence. Walking past portraits of ancestors, ceremonial regalia, and depictions of Spanish triumphs, the faint scent of herbs lingers like a quiet companion. Ferdinand's indulgences reportedly combined sensory pleasure with subtle experimentation, offering moments of reflection or gentle amusement amid the pressures of governance. Fringe stories hint at discreet tasting sessions with trusted confidantes, quietly noting subtle effects on mood or thought. Historians still debate their accuracy, but the scene is vivid. Flickering candlelight, fragrant steam curling upward, and soft private murmurs echoing in the palace. In a secluded alcove, Ferdinand might recline with his cup of steaming herbal infusion, inhaling fragrant vapor as he contemplates state affairs, personal reflection, or quiet amusement. Fringe accounts suggest occasional minor psychoactive ingredients, though scholars remain skeptical. You sense intimacy, warmth, and quiet delight. A monarch balancing public expectation with private sensory indulgence. Finally, as you step onto a balcony overlooking moonlit gardens and softly illuminated fountains, the night air carries the mingled scents of crushed herbs, blossoms, and distant water. Ferdinand reportedly inhaled deeply, savoring moments of private reflection, subtle pleasure, and sensory richness. Fringe anecdotes hint at discreet gatherings with trusted companions, while historians continue to debate details. You feel the layered intimacy, gentle, calm, and delicate pleasure of a ruler whose private rituals brought fragrance, warmth, and quiet delight into the midst of political turbulence. You slip quietly through the dimly lit corridors of Charles X of France, the Bourbon king whose reign was brief but whose private indulgences whispered of comfort and sensory exploration. The faint scent of crushed herbs, spiced teas, and delicate floral infusions clings to the air, hinting at private rituals of relaxation hidden from the scrutiny of court and public eye. Charles reportedly enjoyed herbal infusions, aromatic baths, and mild stimulants, blending relaxation with subtle experimentation. Fringe accounts suggest that he occasionally incorporated exotic or mildly psychoactive herbs to calm nerves or provoke reflective thought, though historians still debate whether these were rare indulgences or habitual practices. Tonight, you let yourself wander into his imagined aromatic world, inhaling the mingled fragrances as the palace settles into nocturnal calm. Picture Charles seated in a private chamber, candlelight flickering across polished wood, gilt mirrors, and delicate porcelain cups of steaming herbal tea in hand. Herbs like lavender, chamomile, and mint curl gently into the air. Fringe tales hint that some infusions contained subtle psychoactive elements, producing mild euphoria or contemplative calm. Scholars still debate the frequency and intent of these indulgences, but the image is compelling. A monarch quietly inhaling aroma and warmth, letting the weight of public expectation soften in the fragrant glow. In the palace gardens, moonlight illuminates fountains, trimmed hedges, and aromatic herbs. Charles reportedly enjoyed solitary walks or brief excursions with trusted confidants, sipping mild herbal teas while inhaling crushed leaves. Fringe anecdotes suggest these strolls occasionally included subtle experiments, observing how aromas, flavors, or mild stimulants influenced mood, reflection, or conversation. Historians still argue about the accuracy and significance of these practices, yet the sensory imagery is vivid. The soft rustle of leaves, distant splashes of water, and gentle murmurs blending with fragrant night air. Inside his chambers, shelves of dried herbs, powders, and tinctures suggest careful preparation and experimentation. Charles reportedly combined ingredients to relax, stimulate subtly, or gently elevate mood. Fringe reports hint that some infusions were mildly intoxicating or creatively inspiring, though scholars remain cautious. You can almost hear the faint hiss of steam from a cup, the mingling aroma of herbs and candle wax, and the quiet pleasure of a monarch absorbed in aromatic indulgence. Walking past portraits of ancestors, ceremonial regalia, and royal tapestries, the faint scent of herbs lingers like a quiet companion. Charles's indulgences reportedly combined sensory pleasure with subtle experimentation, offering moments of reflection or gentle amusement amid the pressures of monarchy. Fringe stories hint at private tasting sessions with trusted confidants, quietly noting subtle effects on mood or thought. Historians still debate their accuracy, but the imagery is vivid. Flickering candlelight, fragrant steam curling upward, and soft murmurs in secluded corners. In a private alcove, Charles might recline with his cup of steaming herbal infusion, inhaling fragrant vapor as he contemplates personal reflection, political affairs, or private amusement. Fringe accounts suggest occasional minor psychoactive ingredients, though scholars remain skeptical. You sense intimacy, warmth, and quiet delight, a monarch balancing public scrutiny with private sensory indulgence. Finally, stepping onto a balcony overlooking moonlit gardens and softly illuminated fountains, the night air carries the mingled scents of crushed herbs, blossoms, and distant water. Charles reportedly inhaled deeply, savoring moments of quiet reflection, private pleasure, and subtle sensory richness. Fringe anecdotes hint at discreet gatherings with trusted companions, while historians continue to debate specifics. You feel the layered intimacy, gentle, calm, and understated delight of a ruler whose private rituals brought fragrance, warmth, and quiet enjoyment to a fleeting reign. You glide softly through the torchlit corridors of William III of England, the stadtholder turned king whose reputation for military precision and political cunning contrasts with whispers of private indulgence. The faint scent of crushed herbs, spiced teas, and delicate floral oils drifts through the stone halls, hinting at hidden rituals of relaxation and mild experimentation. William reportedly enjoyed herbal infusions, aromatic baths, and occasional stimulants, blending leisure with subtle experimentation. Fringe accounts suggest that he occasionally incorporated mildly psychoactive herbs to ease tension or inspire reflection, though historians still debate whether these were routine practices or rare diversions. Tonight, you step carefully into his imagined sensory world, inhaling the mingled fragrances as the palace hums quietly under the night sky. Picture William seated in a private chamber, candlelight flickering across polished wood, brass fittings, and delicate porcelain cups of steaming herbal tea. Herbs like chamomile, mint, and lavender curl fragrance into the air, creating a soothing atmosphere. Fringe tales hint that some infusions contain subtle psychoactive elements, producing gentle euphoria or reflective calm. Scholars still debate the frequency and purpose of these indulgences, but the imagery is vivid. A monarch quietly inhaling warmth and aroma, allowing the burdens of duty and statecraft to soften beneath the golden candlelight. In the palace gardens, moonlight glints over fountains, hedges, and aromatic herb beds. William reportedly enjoyed solitary strolls or brief walks with trusted aides, sipping mild herbal infusions while inhaling crushed leaves. Fringe anecdotes suggest these strolls sometimes involve subtle experiments, observing effects of aroma, flavor, or mild stimulants on mood, thought, or conversation. Historians still argue about the authenticity and significance of these practices, yet the sensory image is vivid. Soft rustling of leaves, distant water splashes, and the gentle mingling of aromatic scents with cool night air. Inside his chambers, shelves of dried herbs, powders, and tinctures hint at careful experimentation. William reportedly combined ingredients to relax, stimulate subtly, or gently elevate mood. Fringe reports hint that some infusions were mildly intoxicating or creatively inspiring, though scholars remain cautious. You can almost hear the faint hiss of steam from a cup, the mingling aroma of herbs and candle wax, and the quiet pleasure of a monarch absorbed in aromatic indulgence. Walking past portraits of ancestors, ceremonial regalia, and depictions of naval triumphs, the faint scent of herbs lingers like a silent companion. William's indulgences reportedly combine sensory pleasure with subtle experimentation, offering moments of reflection or gentle amusement amid relentless responsibilities. Fringe stories hint at discreet tasting sessions with trusted aides, quietly noting subtle effects on mood or cognition. Historians still debate their accuracy, but the imagery is compelling: flickering candlelight, rising fragrant steam, and quiet murmurs in secluded corners. In a private alcove, William might recline with his cup of steaming herbal infusion, inhaling fragrant vapor as he contemplates strategy, diplomacy, or personal reflection. Fringe accounts suggest occasional minor psychoactive ingredients, though scholars remain skeptical. You sense intimacy, warmth, and quiet delight, a monarch balancing the weight of power with private sensory indulgence. Finally, stepping onto a balcony overlooking moonlit gardens and softly illuminated fountains, the night air carries the mingled scents of crushed herbs, blossoms, and distant water. William reportedly inhaled deeply, savoring moments of private reflection, subtle pleasure, and sensory richness. Fringe anecdotes hint at discreet shared experiences with trusted companions, while historians continue to debate specifics. You feel the layered intimacy, gentle, calm, and understated delight of a ruler whose private rituals brought fragrance, warmth, and quiet pleasure to the rigors of statecraft. Now that you've wandered through the quiet, scented corridors and moonlit gardens of monarchs past, the rush of history begins to soften into gentle reflection. The vivid imagery of candles flickering on polished wood, the faint hiss of steam from delicate cups, and the mingled aromas of herbs, flowers, and spiced teas begins to dissolve into a more tranquil rhythm. Each step you took alongside these rulers, from the indulgent Louis XV to the disciplined William III, now feels like a slow exhale, the weight of their power and ceremony giving way to the warmth of private, sensory comfort. As your eyelids grow heavier, imagine the distant splash of a fountain under moonlight, the faint rustle of leaves in the garden, and the soft curling of aromatic steam rising into still air. These private moments of reflection, subtle indulgence, and gentle experimentation remind you that even the most formidable figures sought intimacy and calm. The sensory richness of crushed herbs, warm teas, and delicate fragrances carries a soft reassurance that life, even in its most grand and public forms, finds space for quiet pleasure, contemplation, and fleeting delight. Let your mind drift over each whispered anecdote, each fringe tale of subtle euphoria or aromatic experimentation. The scholars may argue endlessly about the authenticity of these stories, but in this quiet journey, the truth is in the feeling, the warmth, the scent, the shared solitude of those long-gone halls. Allow the gentle cadence of your imagination to match the soft background hum of a fan or the hush of a quiet room. The sense of comfort folding around you like a familiar blanket. Breathe in slowly, savoring the lingering fragrances of history, and exhale the tension of the day. The stories of rulers past become your own lullaby, subtle, layered, and calming, carrying you toward a state of ease. Let the private indulgences of these monarchs fade gently into the background of your mind, leaving only a sense of calm, warmth, and quiet delight as you drift towards sleep.